Kent Police, where's your emergency?
Hiya, who do I report a missing person to?
Who's actually missing?
It's my wife. She walked out early hours Wednesday morning and she ain't been back since.
It didn't add up. Why would she be gone for so long and why wouldn't she tell anyone?
Maybe she had mental health issues and she had enough.
Some people do find they can't cope with the pressures of life and wander off.
The police, they were searching the area with sniffer dogs, police helicopter.
It was much worse than we thought.
And I was like, am I under arrest then?
In the heart of the Kent countryside lies the quaint village of Northbourne.
It's a very picturesque village, very rural setting, close to the coast, and actually a lovely place to be. Lots of nice walks through the fields and woodland nearby.
Everybody knows everybody. There is that sense of community and a sense of it being a safe environment.
We have quite a nice village hall in a pub, surrounded by farmland. It's quite a nice, quiet place to live. Crime is not generally a problem here.
With such a welcoming community, it was the perfect place for Micah Cudworth to set up home.
Micah was born in Poland, but she came to live in Kent, and she came to see Kent as being her home.
She came over presumably to have a better life, to have a new adventure, and settled here and was well known and liked here.
She didn't come to England on her own. She was married before, and she came with the partner that she had at the time. But they separated and she met Jonathan.
John was obviously a local lad and lived in this area all his life as far as he went to school in the area, joined the military, came out of that eventually and got a job here as a forklift truck driver.
Jonathan is a really sweet kid. He is really gentle, quite quiet, very reserved. And he came from a nice family. They were all good people.
With an opportunity for a second chance at love, in 2013, Micah and Jonathan tied the knot. And she found a safe haven with her new extended family in Kent.
Micah's family still lived in Poland. Her only family in England was actually Jonathan's family. She deemed her friends in England to be her family, so living and remaining here was important to her.
She was very involved with his family. They were like one big family, and I think she loved that. I think that's what her intention of coming here. She wanted that family sentiment, and, you know, she got that.
It didn't take long for the happy couple to settle in well to village life.
Mikey was beautiful, funny, fun-loving. She was just a real bright energy. She could make you laugh, make you smile.
They were an ordinary young couple which was missing in the village. So it was nice, it was a pleasure to see them.
Micah and Jonathan were a devoted couple.
As any normal couple would. They'd walk down to the end of the road. Micah would go rushing off wherever work. She'd always smile, she'd always, you know, put her hand up. John, I would see occasionally on his way down to the pub, and occasionally on the way back from the pub.
And it wasn't long before Micah took up part-time work, which put her centre stage in the community.
She had a job as a barmaid in a village pub. And there were lots and lots of people would go in that pub. Quite a small size, but with a lovely big garden. And I think in that pub, it's very close-knit, you know, it's very friendly. And to have had very friendly, bubbly and attractive barmaid there, she would have been a very well-known and very well-liked girl.
8 years since her move from Poland, Micah appeared happy with her life in the UK. But she may not have been as content as it seemed.
Kent Police, where's your emergency?
Hiya, who do I report a missing person to?
Who's actually missing?
It's my wife. She came home about 11:30 because she went to meet somebody for a drink. She had a little bit of a row and she stalled off and she ain't been back since.
So is she vulnerable in any way due to disability, mental health, or any other factors?
She has been a bit down lately.
Okay.
Micah had gone out after work and had a drink with a friend. She'd come home late. They'd had an argument. She'd stormed off. The next day, she was still missing. And then the following morning, Jonathan reported her as missing.
Worried about Micah's whereabouts, officers do a quick search of the house for clues. They discover she had taken just a few essentials with her, keys and a handbag. But her car is still in the driveway and her mobile phone is switched off. Concerned about her state of mind, officers speak to villagers for clues.
My neighbour next door to me told me Micah had gone missing. The police came round, explained what they were doing, interviewed us all.
You know, asking the questions, have you seen anything? Have you heard anything?
But with no information from neighbours, concern grows as to Micah's whereabouts and her state of mind. Kent Police decide to issue a missing persons appeal to the public.
We received a press release from police to say that Micah had gone missing. It's human instinct, so it instantly struck a chord and we thought, something's wrong here. It didn't add up. Why would she be gone for so long and why wouldn't she tell anyone?
Naturally you think, God, this woman must be so unwell. Maybe she had mental health issues and she kind of like had enough and left the house in the middle of the night. It was sad.
Kent Police, where's your emergency?
Hiya, who do I report a missing person to?
Who's actually missing?
In the quaint village of Northbourne, unease is growing over Micah Cudworth's whereabouts. She's been missing for more than 24 hours.
In the village, there was a real concern as to where Micah might be.
From our point of view, it was a case each day we wanted to know where was Micah, had she been found.
Concerned about her state of mind, her loving husband Jonathan has reported her missing. Worried that her low mood had led her to look for comfort outside of the family home.
So is she vulnerable in any way?
No, but she has been a bit down lately.
Okay.
You don't know, but it wouldn't be unusual. It could be some form of mental illness. Some people can't cope with the normal pressures of life and wander off.
Life gets difficult and life gets tough, which it does for all of us, and we all face challenging circumstances in our lives.
Having walked out in the middle of the night after an argument, the village can't imagine what's going through her husband's mind.
I actually reached out to John and said, hey, this is really terrible. And I remember saying to him, just hang on, hopefully she's going to find her and she'll get the help that she needs.
After 24 hours with no contact from Micah and with no clues to her whereabouts, police start considering the possibility she could have harmed herself or met someone out to cause her harm. A full-scale search is launched.
Suddenly, lots of police vans turn up. From going from seeing no police cars or hardly any police cars to being descended on by police was a little bit of a shock.
The police, they were searching the area nearby. That was with sniffer dogs, police helicopter.
You bring in resources, dogs, police dogs, searching fields, especially in the rural area of East Kent, there's a vast amount of agriculture. You might get the helicopter camera up with the infrared to see if you can find someone in the field somewhere that's still alive.
Police continue to scour the surrounding areas and question Micah's family and friends. But it appears after walking out into the night, she simply disappeared.
Generally speaking, most missing persons turn up very shortly, certainly within, if not 24 hours sooner. This was then 30-odd hours. And then, of course, 36, 48 hours. And you always live in hope. But, of course, the longer it goes on, you always fear the worst.
As the days pass, husband Jonathan and the rest of the family desperately cling on for any hope that Micah will be found safe and well.
I was devastated for him. I felt for him, I felt for his family. I just wanted to help them, support them.
We responded as best we could, and the church was open. We had a small little area as a place where people could come for prayer and reflection.
As the local search fails to uncover any clue as to where Micah has gone, detectives decide to increase the media campaign with the hope of reaching out nationally and internationally.
Police are urging anyone who may have seen Micah Cudworth to contact them. The barmaid walked out of her home just before midnight on Tuesday and hasn't been seen since. Polish-born Micah from Northbourne was last seen wearing white trainers, grey tracksuit bottoms and carrying a black handbag.
When the police released her photograph, that's when the public interest really did peak. She looked like a bubbly, happy, kind and well-liked person. So the public interest really did come alive.
There was a lot of talk on social media. You can imagine when you live in these little villages, somebody goes missing and the local newspaper saying, you know, have you seen this person? It was everywhere.
Media campaigns are important, and very often by media campaigns and using the local media especially, you get sightings. The trouble with sightings is you can very often get people ringing in with genuine callers who believe they've seen perhaps the missing person when in fact it's not them at all. So you have to be careful that you're not taking down blind alleys.
And the longer Micah remains missing, the more rumours start to circulate throughout the village.
I think Micah, in the crudest sense, ticked a lot of boxes. As a barmaid, she would have been very popular. She was pretty attractive and supposedly quite bubbly, so she would have been very liked.
Rumours are rife, and particularly in a village. People start talking, you know, she was a little bit too fond of a customer down at the pub.
She was very friendly with certain individuals, and one man in particular, and it was suspected by some people that she was having an affair.
Could Micah be with this man? Had she walked out into the arms of a new lover? Suddenly, there's hope this could be the case. A post from Micah appears on social media, written in Polish.
Micah's friends had received Facebook messages from Micah saying, "It's okay, I'm all right, I just need some space." But that hope was soon dashed when the friends had spoken to police to say that the messages they'd received weren't quite grammatically correct.
Some of her friends were questioning the grammatical use of Polish. It wasn't her usual way of speaking, as it were, on messages.
They couldn't see that Micah would have written them like that, and something just wasn't adding up.
Clearly, if she was sending these messages out, they weren't being sent by her.
But if it isn't her, then who is writing these messages? Detective suspicion that something sinister has happened to Micah grows. And they widen their inquiries and home in on certain people.
The persons of interest would have been the man from the pub who was allegedly having an affair with her, and indeed any other customers that would be regular customers in the pub, because if she's having an affair with somebody, there'll be other customers in the pub who will be able perhaps to provide some significant information with regard to their friendship.
Police trace the man Micah is suspected of having an affair with. He admits he had a drink with Micah on the night of her disappearance. He is questioned. Concerned by the latest development, Micah and Jonathan's friends and family rally round him.
Jonathan had called some friends and asked them to come round and give him support. They came round and they spent time with him.
4 days after Micah was reported missing, Kent police make a shocking announcement.
Police investigating the disappearance of 36-year-old Micah Cudworth have said they've made an arrest. The barmaid from Northbourne went missing 5 days ago and hasn't been sighted since. Police say they are growing increasingly concerned for Miss Cudworth's safety.
What's transpired, it was, yes, much worse than we thought.
Kent Police, where's your emergency?
It's my wife. She walked out early hours Wednesday morning and she ain't been back since.
In the Kent village of Northbourne, police investigating the disappearance of barmaid Micah Cudworth now suspect she may have been murdered. Believing messages Micah sent her friends after she went missing were actually sent by someone else, police question a man she was suspected of having an affair with.
The police released a statement to say that they'd arrested somebody, a man, in connection with Micah's disappearance.
But the man they arrested is not her suspected lover, but her husband, Jonathan Cudworth.
One of John's sisters said he'd been arrested, and I was like, what?
The news sends shockwaves across the village. How could this loving husband have anything to do with her disappearance?
It's hard to describe, really. It's just a lot of disbelief, I think.
The initial reaction for people in the immediate vicinity would be shock, surprise, nice couple.
When somebody's been arrested in connection with someone's disappearance, the public interest really does step up. That's what people then really start to talk about at the school gates, in the pub.
As rumours circulate around the village, it is revealed that Jonathan has been arrested on suspicion of GBH after police visited his house and noticed drops of blood by the front door, with Jonathan admitting that he had a minor altercation before Micah stormed off. Officers secure the house as a potential crime scene and carry out a search of an outbuilding.
And it was outside by the shed that they found some drops of blood.
Inside the outbuilding, officers discover a blood-stained doormat and cat basket. Both items are immediately seized and taken for forensic testing.
I would think that was the time that this became a homicide, murder investigation.
Gradually, the realisation came that she may have actually been killed, and the police presence was becoming, in that sense, rather more sinister.
In custody, police believe the evidence points to Jonathan having more than just hit Micah.
During police interviews, he strenuously denied that he had anything to do with Micah's disappearance.
Jonathan, he was a nice lad. He wasn't mean. I don't remember him being aggressive or angry or volatile.
Jonathan admits he has Micah's Facebook password and posted messages pretending to be from her in Polish. But he says it was to stop her friends from harassing him. He says the blood found was from a minor altercation. Police decide to charge him with murder. But there's one problem. 7 days since she was last seen, there's still no sign of Micah, dead or alive. Officers widen their search both inside Micah's home and the surrounding areas. And suddenly, there's a breakthrough. A large amount of blood is discovered in the sitting room beneath a rug. and more blood is found in the boot of the family car. Police discover Jonathan had bought the rug in nearby Sandwich after Micah had gone missing. Slowly, they start to piece together Jonathan's movements since Micah's disappearance. The search for her is becoming desperate, and the family turn to their friend Ali.
Ali Austin is a psychic. She was contacted by Jonathan's family and asked if she would be able to help in the search for Micah.
So to label myself, I'm a fortune teller. I'm a psychic, I'm a clairvoyant, a clairaudient. I see, hear and sense things. And a message came through, and it was from one of John's sisters. And it said, "Hi Ali, is there any chance you can do a reading for me?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And they were like, "Would you come out and search with us?" And I was like, "Of course I'm going to come out and search with you." And then we went off and we continued to search for 16, 17 hours a day.
We have known of a psychic being brought in before to help try to locate a body. The body has never been found, but sometimes that can be of help to the family because they feel that they're getting somebody to help them. When somebody has lost a member of their family, they will cling on to any kind of hope that they might still be alive.
I just wanted to help this family. I was just like, these poor people, this is horrific. She needs to be laid to rest. And that was all I focused on.
As Ali joins the search for Micah, along with family and friends, police discover video evidence from the night following Micah's disappearance.
A friend of mine, he had a CCTV, which was pointing out to the road. And I think it was John said he didn't go out of the property on that particular night, but it proved to be just after 2 o'clock, I think, in the morning, there was his car going by.
Detectives believe the 10-minute trip is significant in their hunt for Micah and concentrate their search to a 5-minute drive of the house. Further CCTV from earlier that day also proves key to the case against Jonathan.
There is capture of CCTV images from various areas, which includes him in a shop buying cleaning materials and attending a Dill pier, throwing items which turn out, we think, to be her handbag and a phone off the end of the pier.
I think that that's a vital cog that it enabled this investigation to keep on turning and for them to find out what had actually happened.
With police believing the CCTV proves Jonathan is responsible for Micah's disappearance, it also shows he made a trip to a refuse tip with multiple large bags. The search for Micah shifts to a landfill site. As the police search spreads, Ali Austin is concentrating her search in Eastry, where Jonathan grew up.
Quite a few of us were out, and I was like, why don't I try dowsing? Dowsing is a method that has been used for centuries to find objects. Even when I say it, it sounds ridiculous, but we had nothing to lose. I was exhausted. We were in a field, and there was me and Jonathan's sisters, and I used this ring. So I took this ring, and you hold it. So we had this map, and I just got everyone to close their eyes and concentrate, and I was like, just say Micah, like, where are you? So we were sitting there, and I'll be honest, even I'm like, this is ridiculous, you know, this is ridiculous. And the ring stopped on a point on the map, on a roundabout.
Ali and the family make their way to the roundabout and immediately begin to comb the surrounding fields.
I just remember pulling up, and I ran off away from my car, and it was a rape field, and it was like 5 foot high, and you can't move. I've never been in a rape field. You can't move in that stuff. It's all intertwined. And I remember like literally being like this in the field, running, like in a zigzag. And then the next thing I know, I was standing on her. And she was in the field. So when I found her, I just remember screaming to everybody. I found her and told everybody not to move and not to come. But that was the point that her body had been abandoned, yes. And this is where we waited, and obviously it was, from that point, it was a crime scene. I didn't even think about what would happen if I did actually find her. I never gave that a thought. But then when I'm standing there, looking at her, 12 days after her life was taken, I can never unsee that.
Kent Police have said that the body of a woman found in a field near Eastry in Kent is that of missing 36-year-old Micah Cudworth.
The news that everyone feared has now become a reality.
There was a real sense of grief and loss. For that to happen was really quite shocking for people and disturbing. It's a sort of incident you would more likely expect to happen in a big city.
It's a sad thing more than anything else. And Micah was suddenly not being here anymore. It was upsetting, and there was a certain disbelief with that. When you lose anybody in a community, it's tragic, very tragic.
Micah's body is taken to the mortuary where a post-mortem is carried out to determine a cause of death.
The post-mortem reveals Micah was stabbed, I think, 4 times. It would appear she lost half the blood in her body. The injuries she sustained as a result of those stab wounds were clearly fatal.
With Jonathan already in custody, detectives turn their attention to the circumstances surrounding the discovery of Micah's body, and specifically Ali Austin's involvement.
This psychic comes into the frame. She used to go to school, I think, with Cudworth. She practices her psychic medium, and apparently, as a result of some readings that she's done, she finds the body before the police. It's bizarre, absolutely bizarre. I would certainly be having the lady in questioning.
Suddenly, Ali Austin finds herself at the centre of a murder investigation.
I was told to present myself at Folkestone Police Station, and I rode to Folkestone Police Station on my motorbike the next morning. And I was showed to a room, and there was 2 or 3 kind of like detectives there. And the next thing I know, they brought all these maps out, and they're going to me, put a black cross where your mum and dad's house is. So I was like, okay. So I looked at this massive aerial map. I put a black cross where my mum and dad's. They went, put a black cross where Jonathan Cudworth's mum and dad's house is. So I put a black cross where they live. Put a black cross where you found Micah. So I did that. And I remember at that point, something in my head going, this isn't right. This is not, why are you asking me this? This is ridiculous. And then I asked for a break, and I went to get my cigarettes from my crash helmet, and they went, leave your helmet here. And I was like, pardon? And they were like, can you leave your helmet, please? And I was like, why, am I under arrest then? And they were like, no, but you're not allowed to leave.
Ali Austin's involvement sparks a lot of interest from the national media.
It had all of the ingredients for a juicy murder story. The first thing you think is, the husband's done it. But then, a psychic sniffs out a body. That is the sort of thing that, whether people believe it or not, they're interested in it and they want to read, they want to find out everything. It refreshed the story.
But Ali's potential involvement is soon eclipsed following a revelation that on the night of the 10th of May, Jonathan had called a family member from prison and made a startling admission.
He admitted to the crime, the killing.
During the call, Jonathan disclosed the area where he dumped Micah's body. Using this vital info, his family had then turned to Ali to help pinpoint the exact spot. Following this revelation, the police are happy she played no other part.
I do believe I was a suspect. I'm like, you know, local psychic. Maybe I put her there and then wanted the glory of, like, I found a body. Morally, like, that just rips my soul to pieces to think that at some point in a police interview room or a police station somewhere, I genuinely believe that I might have played a part in putting that woman there. But they don't know me. There was a lot of coincidences. You know, I can't deny that.
With Micah's body discovered and Jonathan charged, the question remains, why did this loving husband murder his wife? And how? Has been charged with the murder of his wife, Micah. Despite the evidence against him, Jonathan pleads not guilty to murder. He claims diminished responsibility because of a momentary loss of control. And the case is sent for trial.
Having admitted to the killing and him charged with murder, it's then, of course, up to a judge and a jury, isn't it? That's all the police can do, is put forward the facts, the evidence that they can obtain, and any explanation that the defendant may give.
On the 7th December 2015, the trial begins at Canterbury Crown Court. And the question on everyone's lips is, what could have possibly led to Jonathan losing control and killing his wife, Micah?
John had a trust issues. You know, he didn't trust Micah. He thought Micah was having an affair.
My neighbour, you know, said that there was problems, probably, with their marriage. He'd heard them arguing. She met somebody else, which was one of the reasons for the domestics.
So police found that Jonathan had been tracking Micah's whereabouts through a phone app, which suggests that he had a growing sense of paranoia about where she was, what she was doing, and who she was spending time with.
The court hears what Micah and Jonathan had been arguing about the night she was killed.
Jonathan had been questioning Micah about where she'd been and who she'd been with. And he lashed out in a jealous rage.
The jury hears Jonathan's prepared statement, claiming that Micah had admitted to an affair and was goading him aggressively. The defence being that he momentarily lost control.
Jonathan said that Micah had become aggressive, and he, as a reaction, had felt around for the weapon, and he'd hit her.
This was some tragic crime of passion, that he was actually the victim of this really strong-willed woman that was having an affair. They rowed, he's gone mad, and he's put a knife in her.
The court is stunned to hear Jonathan's version of events. But had he really killed her in a moment of madness?
Crimes of passion, of course they can occur, you know. None of us could say we haven't got it in us. There's people, you know, they might do something in the heat of the moment, regret it, oh no, and go, oh my God, you know, this has happened. It could happen to a lot of people in all different scenarios.
However, details from the post-mortem are read out in court, which questions Jonathan's defence, that he simply lashed out. Not only had Micah suffered a blunt force hit to the head, but she had bruises to her wrists and neck, along with a knife attack that the prosecution claim intended to end her life.
I realised that a crime of passion, a mistake, is maybe lashing out, pushing, shoving. You know, maybe he was cutting apples at the time, maybe he did have a knife in his hand. But she was stabbed 4 times. So she's been stabbed through her heart and then continuously stabbed on the upper part of her body, which corresponds with what my eyes saw.
And soon it becomes clear that Jonathan has a checkered history with relationships.
Police subsequently found out that there was a loose history of domestic violence, which included another ex-girlfriend and Micah herself.
The court hears there had been one prior report to the police of a domestic verbal altercation between Jonathan and Micah.
Micah notified the police that she was a victim of domestic abuse and that she lived in fear of Jonathan. This wasn't a random crime of passion.
It appears Micah and Jonathan's relationship had broken down completely, and she had made plans to leave him.
Since speaking to her family and her friends, she visited Poland 2 weeks before her death. She was leaving him. She'd saved £700, hidden in a drawer. She was going to be free of him. It is alleged that she had met somebody else, and whether she was going to have a life with them, I don't know. And she was confident that it was over. And she returned to England, ready to prepare to start her new life.
But before Micah could move on without Jonathan in her life, events conspired to stop her in her tracks on the night of the 29th of April.
She'd been working at the local pub, and she came home sometime around 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Phone analysis from that evening reveals that Jonathan had become more and more irate as the evening wore on, and was continually asking where Micah was in text messages.
It transpired in court that after Jonathan had killed Micah, he dragged her body to a compost heap in the garden and left her there while he worked out how to dispose of her body.
I believe she was behind the shed and he covered her body in grass cuttings. Everyone was around, and that is where she lay.
On the next day, Cudworth then got rid of her handbag and phone off the end of the pier and bought some cleaning up materials from a local shop.
And then he loaded Micah's body into the back of the car and drove her off to the field where he disposed of her.
The following morning, Jonathan calls the police to report Micah missing.
Kent Police, where's your emergency?
It's my wife. She walked out early hours Wednesday morning and she ain't been back since.
So is she vulnerable in any way?
No, but she has been a bit down lately.
Okay.
The extent that Jonathan had gone to conceal the fact that he had taken Micah's life. He'd tried to cover his tracks by sending messages to her friends. I get the feeling from this behaviour that it's very calculated, it's cold, and it shows no remorse.
During a gruelling trial at Canterbury Crown Court, the evidence against Jonathan appears overwhelming. A sustained, brutal attack on Micah, covering his tracks by disposing of Micah's body and her belongings, as well as a checkered history of past relationships. The jury retires to consider its verdict. Jonathan is found not guilty of Micah Cudworth's murder.
We were so surprised. We thought that there'd been such a strong case for murder against Jonathan, and to find out that he'd been found guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter.
As he admitted to stabbing and killing his wife before the trial, the jury accepts his version of events, that of killing her through diminished responsibility.
I think Mr. Cudworth was an extremely lucky person to get off a murder charge. Very lucky, I think, because I've seen cases where, you know, similar sort of things, and jury have come back guilty of murder.
With the lesser conviction of manslaughter, Jonathan is sentenced to 15 years in prison.
It's appalling. It is appalling. How can her life be worth 15 years? You know, how do we stop this? How do we deter people from going that far? We need stricter sentences. You know, a life should mean life.
Even with the case behind them, the local community still feel the impact of Micah's death.
The sad thing with an event like this is it just has really horrible consequences for everybody. For the families trying to move forward in this situation, and it leaves a scar on the community.
It's her resting place, isn't it? It's not ideal. I know her resting place, final resting place, is now in Poland, as it should be, but it's where her story ended, isn't it? And it should never have been that way. She didn't deserve this. Regardless of whether or not she was leaving him, regardless of whether or not she was dating somebody else, the penalty that she paid was atrocious. And it will stay with us, it will stay with me. It's an absolute tragedy, and it's a tragedy for our community.
A charming and spirited young mother.
Oh, she was so vivacious, like a little firecracker. She was sweet and loving, but she just didn't take any crap off anybody.
Is found strangled in her bedroom.
Whoever did this left her there with no chance to survive.
Police face a challenging crime scene.
There was no forensic evidence whatsoever. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses.
This case was a definite whodunit case.
And a long list of suspects.
He had been hanging around her desk, and he had made some comments that really creeped her out.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past.
He didn't want to accept the fact that they were done. Their relationship was over.
You would think that whoever did it had a score to settle.
Until one big break reveals a culprit.
That one key piece of evidence was the aha moment in the case.
And it shocks everyone.
When they finally discovered who it was just surreal.
There's no rhyme, there's no reason behind it. It was absolutely senseless.
Just before 5 p.m. on a Monday in March of 1999, in the small bedroom community of Norcross, Georgia, police raced through the suburban streets in response to a 911 call.
The only information that we had at hand initially was there had been a person discovered dead in an apartment. It was her fiance that had called 911. When we arrived at the scene, we spoke with the fiance briefly.
The man tells detectives the victim is 20-year-old mother of one, Danielle Jennings. Her 2-year-old son is currently at daycare.
The fiance told us he walked in and found her lying on the bed, and he stated that she was cold and blue.
She was deceased by that point. She was face down on the bed, and he rolled her over and then called 911.
While Danielle's fiance is taken to provide a statement, investigators take a close look at the crime scene.
When you went back into the bedroom, she was on the bed, fully clothed, laying on her back, but you could obviously see signs of strangulation.
She had a ligature around her neck. The ligature appeared to be some type of stocking, and it was tied around her neck very, very tight.
It had been tied off to leave it that way. It's not like it released, which I thought was pretty unusual. I mean, whoever did this left her there with no chance to survive.
The ligature was knotted in the back, which would tell you that the person was on her back, behind her when she was strangled.
Detectives explore the rest of the crime scene, looking for clues.
The bed was messed up. One of the dresser drawers was open. The stocking that she was strangled with may have been one of hers out of that drawer. Her purse was dumped out as if somebody had dumped the contents and rummaged through it. It could have been a robbery or a burglary just gone wrong. However, there was other stuff such as cameras, miscellaneous jewelry that could have been taken, but they were not taken.
It was possibly a burglary that had been interrupted, but you always have to consider the possibility that it could have been a staged burglary because, frankly, there really wasn't a lot of disruption.
Next, investigators try to determine how the killer entered the apartment.
There was absolutely no tool marks or anything on the front door, and then there was a sliding patio glass door. It was locked. There was no evidence of tampering with it at all. We went around and we searched the outside, but we didn't turn up anything of any value.
Before they return to the station to interview Danielle's fiancé, detectives fan out to speak with other tenants in the complex.
Most of the people in these complexes work during the day, and so most of them are not home. We left our business cards with a note asking them to please give us a call.
As the crime scene investigation continues, news of Danielle's violent murder quickly spreads to her family and friends.
When I found out that Danielle died, I said, no, you've got to be kidding me. I said, this cannot be real. And then I dropped the phone and I just started screaming. I was just absolutely in utter shock. How does one handle the information that your best friend, your sister, the person that you basically love more than anybody in this world is gone? Why would somebody do this to such a loving, caring, beautiful person?
Born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1978, Danielle grew up with her mother and stepfather in Stockton, Georgia. Even in her youth, Danielle had a magnetic personality.
She was beautiful, strong, tenacious, ferocious. She was very fun. Danielle was always ready to have a good time, to laugh.
Oh, she was so vivacious, like a little firecracker. She was very tiny, but she had this big attitude. She was sweet and loving, but she just didn't take any crap off anybody.
Danielle showed her resilience when she was left to deal with an unplanned pregnancy alone at the age of 16.
There was never a doubt in her mind that she wanted to have that baby. She wasn't scared. I mean, she had brass balls of steel.
She wasn't gonna let her age stand in the way of being a good mother.
Danielle gave birth to her son, Tristan, in 1996.
She was so proud. I could see her little attitude in him.
The new mother longed for her son to have a father and hoped she had found one when she started dating Luis Payano.
We grew up with Luis, so we go way back with him. We met Luis in our early teen years. Danielle was always partial to Luis, and Luis and Danielle were dating, and I was so thrilled. And the way that Luis would look at Danielle, like she would walk into the room and he would just light up.
Soon, the couple moved into an apartment together. and Danielle landed an office job at a landscaping company.
She was so excited to have like what we titled a big girl job. She was very proud of herself. We were all very proud of her, you know? She was going places.
In December of 1998, Luis asked Danielle to marry him.
She was so excited, and I'm like, this is gonna be the best marriage ever. When Danielle first got her engagement ring, it was too big. And I said, girl, I said, you gotta get it sized. She's like, I don't wanna take it off. It was beautiful.
Danielle had everything going for her. She had a great career opportunity ahead of her. She had a man she was so excited to marry. She had a beautiful son that just meant the world to her. Danielle was really on top of her game.
She was probably the happiest I had ever seen her.
Now, all Danielle's happiness and hope has been stolen by a cold-blooded killer.
I could not even begin to fathom why somebody would do that to her.
Back at the crime scene, investigators are searching for answers.
The scene raised several questions. Of course, the most obvious was, how did whoever it was get into the apartment? Because there was no sign of forced entry. Was it someone she knew? We know, working off the percentages, that the person most likely to kill you is laying next to you in the bed. In this case, Danielle's fiance, Luis.
Coming up, detectives unearth dark secrets.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past.
He was violent. He was abusive. You could tell when he talked about Danielle that it made him mad.
He was just very, very creepy to me. And I know they had tumultuous fights.
The person that did it could have been amongst us.
And just as the case threatens to turn cold,
we felt like we had hit a brick wall.
I had a huge fear that whoever it was got away with it.
A stunning revelation points to a killer no one suspected.
The killer was much closer to home than anybody first thought. I don't think anybody saw it coming.
Police investigating the murder of 20-year-old mother Danielle Jennings have their first suspect, her fiancé, 25-year-old Luis Payano.
Even though he's her fiancé, everybody remains a suspect until such time that we solve the crime.
Investigators question the distraught young man.
He was very emotional, but romance can raise anger to a level sometimes that leads to homicide.
Detectives begin their interview by asking Luis about Danielle's movements the day of her murder.
He stated that he had been at work all day. The last time he had seen Danielle was when he left to go to work.
According to Luis, they had both left the apartment at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle went back into the building to get something. He tells detectives that Danielle seemed distracted because of an upcoming work meeting.
She was supposed to be having a meeting with management that day. She didn't feel easy about it.
Luis says Danielle called him at work around 11:30 a.m.
She wanted to see if Luis would have lunch with her, but he was tied up at work and he couldn't break free.
They didn't have lunch, and later in the afternoon, he couldn't reach her.
He called her at work, and then they told him that she had gone home at lunchtime, but she didn't come back from lunch after a couple of hours.
Luis tells investigators he called Danielle's cell phone and their apartment.
He stated that he was trying to get hold of Danielle and was not getting a response, and then he left work and went home to see if she was there.
Luis said that when he got home, the front door was unlocked, and that really surprised him because they were pretty careful about keeping the front door locked.
Detectives ask Luis about his relationship with Danielle.
We wanted to find out if they had domestic issues. He said that it was a very good relationship and they were very much in love with each other.
To verify his story, detectives call Luis's work and Danielle's loved ones.
Her family and friends stated that They were just a young couple that was very much in love and looking forward to getting married and spending their life together.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past, but Lewis was on the up and up. I mean, he was setting up a financially stable life for him and Danielle and Tristan, and she loved him so much.
Danielle's friends are adamant that Luis would never harm her, and his alibi seems solid.
We were able to confirm that he had been at work all day through statements of his coworkers. As a result, he was eliminated as a suspect. Now you're on the hunt for other suspects.
With Luis in the clear, detectives ask him if he knew of anyone who may want to harm Danielle.
He brought up the name of Jeff, a co-worker of Danielle. She had filed a sexual harassment complaint against him at work. That piqued our interest a little bit. We immediately went to Danielle's place of work, and we met with her supervisor and discussed what was going on.
Danielle's supervisor tells detectives about the young mother's harassment complaint against her coworker.
He was a middle-aged man. He worked at the same landscape company. He had a different job. He was in management. Danielle told her manager and supervisor he had been hanging around her desk and he had made some comments that really kind of creeped her out and acting inappropriately at work.
There was a big age difference between Danielle and Jeff. He was 40, she was 20. He had asked her out for lunch, and she told him that she had a fiance that she loved, and he had made a comment to her that if he was 20 years younger, things would be a lot different.
Danielle had briefly touched base with me about the situation that she was having at work. Dude was kind of crushing on her, and she was trying to get that, under control. But I said, just don't let it get out of hand.
She filed the complaint. I kind of admired her grit. She wasn't going to take it. The company was very responsive to her complaint. They took it seriously. They moved quickly.
Detectives note the timing when told of the company's response.
That day that Danielle was killed, she was supposed to be having a meeting with upper management about the sexual harassment charge.
Once we realized that the meeting had taken place that day, that was something that was suspicious.
Talking with the management, we found out Danielle was anxious and nervous about the meeting.
She was a relatively new employee when she made the complaint. That was one of the reasons she was so nervous, because his career was in a certain amount of jeopardy.
Coworkers state that after the meeting, Danielle went home for lunch, but never returned.
She didn't come back, and we knew that was consistent with the time of death. You had to think, where was the coworker at the time?
Detective suspicions increase when they learn that Jeff was out of the office and did not return until late in the day. Was this too much of a coincidence? Could he have killed Danielle as revenge for her complaint?
We definitely wanted to speak with him face to face.
Detectives hunting the killer of Danielle Jennings suspect a harassment complaint against her coworker, Jeff, may have led to retaliation and murder.
We were now focused on him as a possible suspect. We had to consider the possibility that he followed her home and ambushed her and killed her.
Investigators bring the 40-year-old in for an interview and ask about his interaction with 20-year-old Danielle.
He admitted to asking her out for lunch, but he said other than that, he had not done anything.
He talked about the sexual harassment complaint and pretty typically said, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I didn't know she was that offended.
According to police reports, Jeff denies any sexual intentions toward Danielle.
He told police that whatever lapse in manners that he had had with Danielle, that he liked her. He seemed to be genuinely dismayed to find out what had happened.
Detectives ask if Danielle's complaint gave him a reason to want to harm her.
His first reaction was he was angry. He was adamant that he was not a suspect. And then he said it couldn't have been me because my truck was broken and I was on a job with somebody else, with a coworker, and I can prove it.
Jeff provides investigators with the name of the coworker he claims to have been with.
We immediately ran down his coworker at like 1 o'clock in the morning. This guy verified that he was with him all day till the close of business. They were together.
With his alibi confirmed, police eliminate Jeff as a suspect. 24 hours after Danielle's murder, the enormity of her death is only just starting to hit home for Danielle's loved ones.
Things like that didn't happen where we grew up. I could not believe somebody would do that to her. It was just the most nightmarish thing I could imagine. It made me question God. Why would you let something that horrible happen to her?
I didn't want to accept it. I couldn't sleep. I just kept saying, she's dead, she's dead. Danielle should not be dead.
The following day, investigators receive the autopsy report and scour it for anything that might point to Danielle's killer.
The manner of death was asphyxiation or strangulation.
The medical examiner stated that she probably lost consciousness within about 15 to 20 seconds after the ligature was placed around her neck.
It seemed clear that she had been surprised by her attacker, had no time to move, had no time to strike back.
It's almost like it came out of nowhere. We knew from the positioning of the knot, someone had come up behind her with the nylon stocking, pulled it tight until she lost consciousness, and then tied it off to kill her. She had not been sexually assaulted. There weren't any other injuries. There weren't any defensive injuries.
This case was a definite whodunit case. There was no evidence found at the scene that could help us.
There was no forensic evidence whatsoever. No transfer of skin, no fingerprints, nothing a lab could look at.
After striking out with the autopsy, investigators revisit the theory that the homicide was a robbery gone wrong.
We don't live there, so we don't know what's supposed to be there and what's not. We asked the fiance to go back through the apartment with us and tell us what he sees missing. The smallest detail sometimes helps point us into the direction of a suspect, but nothing was missing according to the fiance. At that point, we had absolutely nothing to go on other than the stocking that she was strangled with.
Detectives ask Luis if he recognizes the stocking.
We wanted to know whether it came from her. It was a tan, knee-high women's stocking, and he said that she never wore anything like that, and we didn't find any in the apartment. Whoever did this brought that with them.
The homicide was brutal, violent, and vicious. It lent itself to a personal motive. You would think that whoever did it had a score to settle.
Louise told us she had had some tumultuous relationships in her past, so we pursued that angle.
Investigators asked Danielle's friends about her previous relationships.
When they first started questioning me, they were asking me a lot of questions about her boyfriends in the past, who I felt might have been able to do it. And then it clicked that, Eddie, he was a tow truck driver and he was a big guy. And he was just very, very creepy to me.
Her best friend told us about her ex-boyfriend. He was violent, he was abusive.
She ended up having to get a restraining order on him. With Eddie, no one ever really knew when he was going to pop up again.
That was somebody we needed to look at.
Two days after the murder of 20-year-old Danielle Jennings, friends have alerted investigators to Eddie McElwaney, an ex-boyfriend with a violent history.
We learned a lot about her former boyfriend. We learned that she had begun to see him when she was a teenager, when she was younger.
Friends reveal Danielle started dating Eddie shortly after she became pregnant from another relationship. But Eddie's behavior soon raised red flags.
As they got more serious, he became more possessive and controlling, and he definitely wanted to start isolating her from her friends and family more.
I didn't want to be around him. I did not like the way he made me feel. I didn't like the way he looked at Danielle. I mean, he would sometimes look at her with disgust. And I know they had tumultuous fights.
We learned it had been an abusive relationship, physical and emotional.
I mean, she would stand up to anybody, but as tough and as a badass as she was, I think she was a little bit afraid of him.
Things only got worse with Eddie when Danielle gave birth to her child.
Her family and friends stated that shortly after her son was born, Eddie was getting involved in drugs, and that was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and she ended the relationship with that.
Danielle moved out and tried to start fresh, but Eddie had other plans.
She knew it was going to be difficult, but she didn't realize that Eddie was not going to leave Danielle in peace. He didn't want to accept the fact that they were done, their relationship was over. She never knew when he would turn up around the corner, when she just wanted to be left alone.
She had gotten a restraining order against Eddie because he had been stalking her. He had been driving back and forth in front of her house. He had gone to her work, and she was in fear that she was in danger.
We found out that he had violated the restraining order several times. He would call her, leave voicemails for her. He would drive by her house several times a day or night.
When police ask when Eddie last contacted Danielle, the answer is troubling.
Danielle's family had told us that within the last few months, he had been calling her, trying to get her to talk to him, but she would just hang up on him.
Could Eddie have shown up at Danielle's apartment the day she was killed, leading to a deadly confrontation?
I've seen a lot of domestic abuse cases, so I knew that there was a possibility that with his past, that he could have done something like that.
Investigators track down Eddie and bring him in for questioning.
In the interview with Eddie, he was kind of belligerent and unhappy to be there and a little bit hostile. You could tell when he talked about Danielle that it made him mad. What we saw with Eddie certainly had all the earmarks of a domestic violence case.
When questioned about his relationship with Danielle, Eddie's responses raised detective suspicions even more.
When he was asked about the relationship, his version was a little bit different. He never mentioned any abuse. He thought everything was great.
We asked him when was the last time that he had had any contact with Danielle, and he said that he had not talked to her for at least a year or longer. We know that he's lying about that. From speaking with Danielle's family and friends, we knew in the last several months he had been calling her.
At that point, he's looking pretty good. So you have to determine where he was at the time of the crime.
Eddie tells detectives that he was working many miles away from where Danielle was killed.
He said that on his job as a tow truck driver that he had to go out of state.
Investigators immediately look into Eddie's alibi.
His boss verified that he was out of state and he was able to produce hotel receipts, gas receipts that showed that he was actually out of state at the time of the crime.
Whenever he responded to a legitimate call, he had to log it, and his whereabouts could be verified throughout the day.
That is a pretty tight alibi, so he was eliminated as a suspect.
It's another dead end for detectives.
Once again, we're knocked for a loop and we're back to ground zero, and he moves down the line and we're looking for somebody else.
It was infuriating. It was frustrating. I had a huge fear that whoever it was got away with it, because people get away with murder every day. I was really hoping that the detectives would find something, because you're sitting here trying to point a finger at somebody that you don't know who.
There was this air of suspense around everything because we didn't know at that time who had killed Danielle. The person that did it could have been amongst us.
We had basically eliminated everybody who was close to the victim. When you get to that point of an investigation, you don't have anywhere else to logically follow up.
With no more leads, the investigation is at a standstill.
We felt like we had hit a brick wall. And then we got a call that changed everything.
Three days after finding Danielle Jennings strangled in her apartment bedroom, police hunting her killer have just got a stunning new lead.
We received a phone call from a Miss Kirk that resided at the apartment complex.
The woman tells detectives about a disturbing incident that took place a week before Danielle was killed.
She was awakened one morning by someone knocking at the door, and she looked out the peephole but didn't see anybody there, so she went back to bed. And a few minutes later, she hears the front door open, and the maintenance man is standing there. The maintenance man says that he's there for a work order. However, Miss Kirk says she felt very uncomfortable the entire time that he was in there because he was always staring at her, like he was more preoccupied with her than he was completing the work order.
The woman cannot provide the name of the maintenance man, but she gives a description to police. Detectives head back to Danielle's apartment complex to investigate.
While speaking with the management at the complex, we found that there was another case similar in the past from a Miss Bruno that lived in the apartment complex.
Management told the detectives that someone had walked into this woman's apartment. She had, of course, asked him who the heck he was. What are you doing in my apartment? And he said maintenance, and claimed that he was there to change light bulbs. And she said, I don't have any light bulbs to change. He kind of mumbled and stumbled, and then, maybe I have the wrong apartment, and he backed out and left. It was so similar to the other one, which of course raises our eyebrows.
The complex was big enough so that there were several maintenance workers, but only one closely fit the description given by the young ladies. That would be Calvin Oliver.
We showed a photograph of Mr. Oliver to Miss Bruno and Miss Kirk, and both of them identified him as the person that had walked in on them.
Investigators discover a disturbing trend emerged after Calvin had been hired 7 months ago.
Come to find out, there had been several burglaries reported where items had been stolen out of apartments that had no forced entry.
Could Calvin have been responsible for these thefts?
We learned that he had an apartment in the complex. The fact that he lives there makes it so accessible that he could walk around, not be suspicious. We also learned that the custodians had access to the master keys of every apartment. He has complete access.
Detectives search for any link between Danielle and Calvin.
We found out that he had done a work order in her apartment a couple of weeks prior to the murder.
That is somebody that you really want to look at. It went back to our original theory of if this was a burglary, then it had been interrupted. He could have known that Danielle Jennings was gone during the daytime, and he decided that day that he was going to enter that apartment.
Investigators haul Calvin Oliver in for an interview, but make the call to slow play their suspicions.
When Oliver was brought in for questioning, we didn't want to tip him off to anything about the homicide. So he was interviewed initially about the burglaries. He absolutely denied any of that. He said, I didn't steal anything, I didn't go into apartments. He denied any involvement in any burglaries.
The 42-year-old tells detectives that his intrusion on the two women in the complex was a simple misunderstanding.
Once we got around to interviewing him about the murder, the first question was, did you hear about this? It was kind of odd. You would have thought that a person who worked in that apartment complex and was there every day would have heard everything about it. He went, yeah, I think I heard something about it. I don't know much about it. I don't know that woman.
He insisted he knew nothing about, as he described her, that dead girl.
All he admitted to knowing her was that he had done the work order in her apartment.
At that point, we had a pattern of conduct going into apartments. We had the admission that he had been in the apartment, but we had nothing that directly linked him to the murder.
With nothing concrete on Calvin, detectives end the interview. But before they let him walk free, police run a background check and are shocked by what they find.
He had a criminal history of burglary and theft. There was an outstanding warrant on him for failure to appear on a burglary charge in another jurisdiction. That day that Danielle was killed, if he's in there and she walks in on him, that would be a reason for him to cause her harm because he doesn't want to go back to prison.
He had an outstanding warrant, so he was held for that, and that bought them enough time while they investigated.
Based on the burglaries that had occurred in the complex, we obtained a search warrant for his apartment. We're trying to see if we can find anything that would tie him to Danielle Jennings. We're looking for any type of the stockings or pantyhose or anything that would be similar to the one that we found tied around her neck.
Detectives find no matching stocking, but they do discover incriminating evidence.
We do find evidence of the other burglaries that had been committed in the complex. And then we also found out that he had possession of a master key for the apartment complex so that he could open any door on any building at any time, and he was not supposed to be in possession of that key.
It's only enough evidence to allow investigators to charge Calvin with burglary.
We concluded that search with those items, but nothing was found relevant to the murder. You really don't have anywhere else to go at that point.
We don't have a stocking, we don't have anything that ties him to Danielle or her apartment at all.
That's where we were until Luis called. Out of the blue, he said, do you have the engagement ring?
We told him, no, we don't have a ring. We didn't know one was missing. And then he describes the ring, and then the big bright light goes off. When we were doing the search on Oliver's apartment, we noticed a ring on a dresser in his bedroom, but the ring didn't match any of the items stolen, so we really didn't have a reason to seize it at that time. We do another search warrant, go back into the apartment, we seize that ring, we show it to the fiance. He can't positively identify the ring, but he says her best friend will definitely be able to identify it. If we were able to identify that as being Danielle's ring, that would physically tie Oliver to Danielle and her apartment on the day that she was murdered.
With the entire investigation on the line, detectives race to the home of Danielle's best friend.
Is that ring the engagement ring? This is something we gotta know.
Investigators believe the key to solving the murder of Danielle Jennings is her missing engagement ring.
If we had that ring, then we had the killer.
Detectives have seized a ring from suspect Calvin Oliver's apartment. But is it Danielle's engagement ring? They hope her best friend can answer that question.
The detective and Lewis were there, and I said, well, what's going on? And the detective looked at me and he said, Leslie, He said, "Do you know what Danielle's engagement ring looked like?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." The detective said, "Is there any defining characteristics to this ring?" He goes, "And I need you to be specific." And I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "It was bent." She had bent the band so it stayed snug on her finger because she wouldn't take the dang thing to get sized.
We needed to find out when was the last time she had seen her wearing the ring.
I said, "I saw Danielle the Sunday before she was killed, and she had a ring on Sunday night." And he takes the evidence bag out and he says, "Is this her ring?" And the minute I saw it, I knew it was hers.
When we had that ring and had it identified as being hers, we knew that we had the guy. We knew we had the right person.
Finding the ring was the aha moment in the case. And that was the piece of evidence that allowed us to charge Calvin Oliver with murder.
9 days after her death, Calvin Oliver is arrested for the murder of Danielle Jennings.
The primary charge was malice murder, and that means that you intentionally and unlawfully kill another human being.
Detectives once again interview Calvin, this time taking a different approach.
Once you have a suspect under arrest for the charge that you're interviewing him about, then the interview becomes very direct. He was given a chance again to tell the story where he denied any involvement in the murder, and then he was confronted with the evidence that we had.
We told him about the ring, and that's when he said, "Well, I stole that ring 2 weeks ago when I did the work order in her apartment." But see, we knew that was a lie because we had people that had seen her wearing the ring, so we knew that he was lying about that.
Calvin refuses to answer any more questions.
We told him that he was being charged with malice murder because you took the pantyhose with you into the apartment because you had intent to harm someone, and he said there was no intent there, which was a good comment to have in a statement. It's like he admitted to killing her without knowing that he had admitted to it. We were convinced 100% that we had our guy. This is the guy that was responsible for the death of Danielle Jennings, and that we were going to send him to prison for the rest of his life.
News of an arrest in Danielle's murder brings relief to her loved ones and surprise.
When they finally discovered who it was, the maintenance man in her apartment building, it was just surreal.
I don't think anybody saw it coming. The killer was much closer to home than anybody first thought.
When I saw his picture, I threw up, knowing that that was the man that strangled my best friend for no reason.
At trial, prosecutors present how they believe the crime unfolded.
The day Danielle was killed, Mr. Oliver had already let himself in, hoping for financial gain. After the HR meeting about her coworker, Danielle went home for lunch by herself. Once she opened the door and stepped in, he knew she was there, and he knew she could not exit again. He was not going to get caught.
He ambushed her from behind with the stocking. He came over her head. He pulled it tight, pushed her down onto the bed until she lost consciousness, and then he tied the ligature off, and there was no way for her to escape. There was no heat of the moment. There was no emotion. He killed Danielle because it made his life easier.
The jury hears about the prosecution's most damning evidence, Danielle's stolen engagement ring.
I had to be the one to testify about the ring because I identified the ring. I actually had to look at that man. I had to sit there and look at him. Calvin Oliver sat there just staring daggers into me, is what he did, and tried everything he could to make me feel uncomfortable. And I took a big, deep breath, and I stared right back at him.
There was no explanation for the presence of this ring in Calvin Oliver's apartment, other than he took it off Danielle Jennings' dead finger.
On October 13th, 2000, after a 5-day trial, the jury delivers their verdict.
He was found guilty on all charges.
The judge sentences Calvin Oliver to life in prison.
When the verdict came through, we were all holding hands. We just knew justice had been served as far as it could be. I mean, we were glad, but it still wasn't gonna bring her back. Her mom was never the same again. It destroyed her. That horrible man took away an angel that was put here. She was a huge light to me, to her fiance, to her son. She was everything to a lot of people. I still, to this day, I still dream of her. There's not a day that goes by that I don't miss her.
A loving husband and father with so much to live for.
He did everything for his family. He was an amazing daddy. He loved life. He loved to be happy.
Is ruthlessly gunned down at home in front of his wife.
When he was laying there on the floor, nothing can prepare you for that.
They stood over the victim's body with a shotgun and delivered a fatal blow.
This wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination.
Police tracked down several suspects.
She was absolutely the possible person who was involved. She had all the motive.
He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence.
And we knew that he and the victim had some bad blood between them.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer,
we were pretty frustrated, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
The case takes a mind-blowing turn.
She sang like a songbird.
He had been in possession of the guns used.
And law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
To reveal a killer no one imagined.
This is unbelievable.
It was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
The darkest, blackest soul.
Known for its white sand beaches, Panama City lies on the Gulf Coast of Florida's Panhandle.
Our biggest industry is tourism, with millions of people coming to enjoy the Gulf Coast.
The community is very tight. You know most of your neighbors, you know everybody that you do business with on a personal name basis.
But in the early hours of October 6, 1998, the town's sense of safety is rocked by a chilling 911 call.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a call from a woman that her husband had been shot and killed.
There's a lot of shots. I ran back to the bedroom. The killer wasn't in the house. He was coming after us. I literally thought everybody was gonna die, and I was so scared.
Police raced to the home, expecting to encounter an active shooter.
Their first thought is clearing that house, making sure that the killer's not still in the house.
As the officer entered, the first thing that he noticed was the victim's body in the kitchen area.
When they started calling out that they were the police and they were there, the wife was in a bedroom.
She had retreated to seek safety for her and her children, which were still in the house.
This is all just happening so quickly. I don't know how I'm supposed to trust that whoever's out there is not the killer.
Officers find no sign of the gunman and assure Angelica it's safe to come out of the bedroom.
The wife came out and she was very, very hysterical.
When they walked me back out, when he was laying there on the floor, I knew he was gone. You have somebody murdering your husband and shooting you, all in seconds. Nothing can prepare you for that.
Angelica identifies the man as her husband, 30-year-old Ron Stovall.
The children were taken to Ron's parents' house. They didn't live too far away. And the victim's wife went to the police department where we could talk to her.
With Angelica and the children out of harm's way, detectives can examine the crime scene.
As a responding detective, I go in and start looking around. Ron, the victim, he had been shot 3 times in the back, once in the hip, and there was a shot to the back of the head.
Investigators find an important clue close to the victim's body.
There were some bloody footprints there on the floor. Part of those footprints had what looked like the letter H, 2 H's kind of next to each other on the sole.
Whoever was wearing that shoe had perpetrated at least part of the crime because they would have been standing in the victim's blood and then exiting the residence following the homicide.
The Stovall's front door also reveals how the murder unfolded.
We could see her husband was shot outside, and then the killer shot through the door, and he got into the house, and he had shot Ron in the back of the head.
As daylight breaks, a forensic team scours the outside of the home.
They found a handgun projectile out on the sidewalk near the driveway.
The killer shot what it clearly looks like a handgun round to the lower extremities, and then you have a shotgun round to the head. This was overkill. They stood over the body and delivered a fatal blow. When you see that type of crime scene, you're looking immediately for someone that displayed some type of grudge or emotional hatred for the victim.
While forensics wrap up their investigation at the crime scene, detectives head to the police station to speak with Ron's wife, Angelica.
We really took note how emotionally overtaken she was. But she had been an eyewitness to this scene. So she was critical in our investigation.
I can't even comprehend what's going on. He was dead. I did not want to live without him. Ron was truly amazing. He was always full of life, very kind, sincere, very real.
Born in Panama City, Ron Stovall was one of 4 siblings.
He was very close with his family. He was always out doing stuff with school, doing stuff with the church.
He was well known within the community.
Ron served almost 4 years in the Navy. He had felt a commitment to his country and enjoyed his naval service.
Ron always dreamt of having a family, and in 1989, he met his first wife, Tina Trexler.
Tina and Ron got married, and they had 1 child, they had a daughter.
The marriage was a rocky one, and after 6 years, it fell apart. Soon after, Ron met single mom Angelica at a local beach bar.
He said he knew from the second he saw me that he loved me. Our first night, we went on a date, took me to the beach, to the ocean, put out a blanket, listened to some Marvin Gaye, had Italian food. It was very romantic. He stole my heart, and I was never in love before. I just fell right into his arms.
In 1997, the couple married. Just like Ron, Angelica had a child from a previous relationship. A year later, their family of 4 became 5 when they had a daughter of their own.
Ron took on several jobs. He worked as a waiter, he worked as a delivery man for the UPS companies.
He was very dedicated, and he just got his massage therapy license. He did everything for his family. We were very happy.
Who would want to gun down this loving husband and father in cold blood? At the station, Angelica tells police how the murder unfolded.
I was able to tell the cops everything I knew, and I didn't try to hold anything back. Ron got up at about 3 o'clock every morning, and I would get up and make his lunch for him to take to work.
She explains how Ron left the house and was suddenly ambushed.
There were some shots. I didn't know what was going on. He collapsed on the ground, and the killer tried coming through the door, so I was fighting with him. He got his hand through it. I grabbed the gun, and he opened the door with his hand, and I looked down that barrel of that silver gun and he shot it.
The bullet just misses Angelica.
I ran back to the bedroom.
As Angelica shares more details about the deadly attack, detectives gain important information about the killer.
She described him as male, brown eyes, brown hair, and that he had some type of facial hair, possibly a mustache. She indicated hearing the assailant say to Ron as he was delivering the fatal gunshot wound, "This is for her."
It sounded very evil.
Angelica tells police she doesn't know the meaning behind the killer's words.
We need to find out who her was, and we needed to find out what made this so personal to her.
Well, this wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination, is what it was.
Investigators ask Angelica who might want Ron dead.
Immediately, she went to Tina, his ex-wife. Ms. Stovall indicated that the relationship between Ron and his ex-wife was volatile. There was a custody issue over their daughter.
Things got a little bit more sticky with the custody setup, and Ron was filing for full custody of the child.
Could the bitter custody battle have turned deadly?
This was an enormous red flag for us as a team. Whoever her was may have in fact had to do with his ex-wife.
It's probably one of the worst situations we ever deal with, is with the man and woman and children involved. It will just about make a person do anything.
Coming up, police uncover a key piece of evidence.
He brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene,
leading to a disturbing plot.
The photo identification that made him a prime suspect.
It was his eyes. What I saw was the same person.
And a sickening betrayal no one saw coming.
They planned this whole thing.
None of us had ever worked a case like this.
I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred.
Police investigating the cold-blooded shooting of 30-year-old Ron Stovall are looking into his relationship with his ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
We knew that there was an extreme amount of tension between Ron and his ex-wife, and there was a custody battle that was forthcoming.
Ron and Tina originally shared custody, but Ron had filed a petition basically saying that he wanted full custody of the child.
Up to this point, Tina was that individual that had the most to gain from Ron's death. Perhaps she had not been the one on scene, but it still doesn't eliminate her as having some type of involvement.
This looked like certainly an intentional and a premeditated killing. Might have been a killing for hire.
Detectives speak to Ron's friends and family to get a clearer picture of the animosity with Tina.
When Ron remarried, it was okay, but not really okay. Tina, as well as her family, did not like the new wife, and the situation deteriorated between all of them.
As Ron and Angelica's family grew, Tina's behavior appeared increasingly erratic.
Tina began feeling that Ron was trying to work Tina out of the picture as the mother, and so that had really kind of amplified the rub and the tension.
There was all this, crazy fighting, and it was too hard for his daughter. We were just concerned.
This custody hearing was coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks from when this incident happened.
Tina was absolutely the possible person who was involved in this murder. She had all the motive.
Could the custody battle have driven Ron's ex-wife to murder? Investigators bring Tina in for an interview.
One of the things that was most alarming when we sat down with Tina was that there was no remorse, no emotional activity on her part, that she was even concerned that he was dead.
When investigators ask about her relationship with Ron, Tina's answer is surprising.
We knew there were a lot of hostilities, but when Tina was interviewed, she kind of painted that the relationship with them was cordial, it was friendly. It's a red flag for us as investigators because she's already showing signs of deceit.
With suspicions raised, detectives grilled Tina about her whereabouts in the hours leading up to Ron's murder.
She told us the night before the homicide, she had went to work at a local restaurant. She was a bartender. She got off sometime between 11 and midnight. She had went home and sat and watched TV with her mother. Then after that she had went to bed, and at the time of the homicide itself, she had been home asleep.
Before police can press Tina further, the interview is interrupted.
Her mother had hired a lawyer for her.
The attorney made contact with Tina and immediately ended the interview.
Unable to finish questioning Tina, detectives look into her alibi.
Police were able to establish that she had been at work that night till 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Investigators also speak with Tina's mother, Ann Trexler.
She was the grandmotherly type and was helping Tina get back on her feet and help her get through this divorce.
And come across as a very down-to-earth, nice lady, a housewife, and she confirmed that Tina had been at the house with her watching TV.
Though Tina's alibi checks out, police still theorize that she could have hired someone to kill her ex-husband.
We conducted a preliminary investigation into her financial records. Everything was consistent with that of just a working-class individual making normal purchases.
1 week into the investigation with no concrete evidence pointing at Tina, police look for other suspects. They quickly discover Tina wasn't the only one in a dispute with Ron.
Tina had a boyfriend. His name was Adrian Harris, and there had been some confrontations between Ron and Mr. Harris regarding the way Ron was treating Tina. And in fact, at one point, there had been some threats made on Harris's part.
Had Adrian decided to confront Ron, leading to deadly consequences.
As we began looking into Mr. Harris, whether he was paid to do it or whether he did it on his own, we weren't sure, but the concern was that he may have perpetrated this to make good with Tina for the purpose of helping her.
Investigators tracked down Adrian over 900 miles away near Baltimore.
When we talked with Adrian, he did acknowledge that there was some bad blood between the two of them, but he really kind of downplayed the significance.
The day of the murder, he told us he went to work.
He had clocked in before 7:30, and the time of Ron's death was 3:30 in the morning.
Detectives checked travel times between Baltimore and Panama City.
There was not enough time to get to Panama City from several states away to do the murder and go back home.
While Adrian is ruled out, someone close by catches the investigators' attention.
We talked to his roommate, Guy McInvale.
When the officers went to talk to Adrian's roommate, they discovered the description of the killer that Angelica gave to law enforcement. The roommate fitted quite well.
Guy McInvale had brown eyes, brown hair, and he had a mustache. Now we had another individual that we want to look at.
Once we saw him, Guy fit the description. He was a roommate with Adrian Harris, and we knew that Harris and the victim had some bad blood between them. We thought maybe he went there to kill him.
Is this the break police have been hoping for? Investigators rush to confirm if Guy is a true match for the gunman.
We got pictures of him to show the victim's wife, Angelica, see if he could have been the one that she saw that night.
Back in Panama City, detectives include the picture of Guy into a photo lineup.
Angelica was an essential witness.
She was a witness who can identify the individual that did the crime. Her photographic identification, it was surprising. It
has been 2 weeks since 30-year-old father, Ron Stovall, was shot to death at home in front of his wife, Angelica. Now, detectives hope she can identify the shooter from a photo lineup.
She picked out Guy McInvale as being the killer.
It was his eyes. There was something very, very similar. What I saw was the same person.
There was an identification of Guy McInvale that made him a prime suspect.
We have Miss Stovall's positive identification of Guy as the individual that was in front of their house. There's a sense of relief that begins to sweep through the unit because you're finally on to a really developing hot lead. We want to now try to establish what type of physical evidence do we actually have between the victim, Ron, and Guy.
Detectives get a search warrant and race over to Guy's Baltimore residence. They make a telling discovery.
We search his items, and looking at me right square in the face was a pair of shoes consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. So we're moving in the right direction.
Police bring Guy to the local police station for questioning.
Although we still were missing the key pieces of evidence, the guns and such as that, we really felt like we're starting to put together the edges of the puzzle. In speaking with Guy, what he provided us for an alibi was that he was in Maryland working. At the end of work, he went home, slept. The next day he got up, went to work, and so that was his alibi.
Detectives check out Guy's story.
We had an opportunity to speak with Guy at his place of employment, and we were able to collect some video that correlated with his timeline of what he said. There was physically no way possible for him to have been here in Panama City at the time of the crime.
It turned out that what Guy McIngvale said to the police was correct. Guy had an alibi.
Eager to further prove his innocence, Guy volunteers to take a polygraph.
He successfully passed that. So we were able to clear Mr. McIngvale.
For police, it's a disappointing setback.
We were pretty frustrated, and it's a roller coaster. It's one of those, now you're back in the lows again, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
Angelica wanted to help the officers along, but her perception at the time of the event was clouded by the terror, the trauma of the incident itself.
I remember him being the same person. It stuck in my head like that, but I was wrong.
It's difficult when you see something that quick that you can say, okay, this is the individual that did the crime.
We thought we had this thing solved, but you just got to go regroup, see what you still have to do, and you just start from there.
Desperate for new leads, investigators review Ron's autopsy report.
The autopsy confirmed 2 different weapons. They told us that it was a .357 round that he had been shot with, plus the shotgun shell. One big thing we learned was that shotgun residue got in his face. We think that Ron was laying there on the floor, and this guy's saying this is for her, and he presses that shotgun to the back of his head, and Ron's looking at him when that went off.
The forensics report contains another crucial detail that could lead police to the killer.
These were close proximity rounds, and so we knew that this was something personal. And the shotgun shell was paramount. It was a unique round. We would be able to identify it. So that was a plus in our corner.
Detectives share details of the firearms with local law enforcement, hoping to track down their owner.
We work so closely with the different police departments in the area. We talk to them all the time in case something turns up.
As investigators continue to search for answers, Ron's loved ones struggle with their grief.
The best thing in my life was that life. I didn't think I was strong enough to go through anything without him. He was always full of life. Losing your soulmate, you can't even explain how much pain that was. It still is. It'll never go away.
3 weeks after Ron's murder, the investigation is threatening to grow cold, but then police receive a tip that reignites the case.
We got a call from the Panama City Beach Police Department. They had a home invasion out there on the beach. During that arrest, they recovered 2 handguns and a short-barreled shotgun.
They knew from the investigation of the crime scene where Ron Stovall was killed that a shotgun had been used and that a handgun had been used.
That coincides with what we're looking for. We wanted to go over the evidence they had and the circumstances.
Could these be the weapons connected to Ron's murder?
The gentleman that they arrested, we started looking into him, and looking at his background and everything. And he had a pretty lengthy criminal history, had actually been linked to some murders in the past. He really caught our attention. This turned out to be a big break.
Police in Panama City are investigating the cold-blooded homicide of husband and father, Ron Stovall. They now believe the missing murder weapons were used in a home invasion robbery less than 15 miles away.
When meeting with this investigator from the Beach Police Department, what he produced from his crime scene was this: a handgun and a sawed-off shotgun. That coincides with what we're looking for. Then he brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene. We have everything that meets the parameters. Now we really believe we're on the right path.
The weapons are sent off to the crime lab. While detectives await the results, they dig deeper into this new lead.
At the Beach Police Department, they identified the individual as Tony Alberto Perez. He went by Tony. He had an extensive criminal history. There was some acts of violence in his past, or some drugs in his past. They really felt like he was a pretty violent individual.
Another detail catches their attention.
Tony had brown eyes, brown hair, and facial hair. He looks just like our guy. He met Miss Stovall's physical description to a T.
Investigators head to the nearby jail where Tony is being held for the home invasion.
He come across as a kind of a likable guy. He was laughing and cutting up, but the more he talked, more red flags went up. He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence. He was completely nonchalant about it.
Detectives turn up the heat and ask Tony if he killed Ron Stovall.
Tony totally denied any involvement, any knowledge of Ron, any knowledge of anything that may have happened on that date, and basically told law enforcement, it's not me, I'm not the person.
Despite Tony's denials, investigators believe he's withholding information, and they obtain a search warrant.
Tony Perez had items that he owned stored at the landlord's house, and we're searching through Tony Perez's items over there. And then we find a pair of work boot type shoes.
While inspecting the footwear, detectives notice a key detail.
Those work boots had what looked like the letter H, two H's kind of next to each other on the sole. It looked like what we had found at the crime scene. And we got those sent right off to the lab.
As police hunt for more incriminating evidence against Tony, the ballistic results come back.
And we actually got confirmation from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that the guns collected that Tony had been in possession of matched perfectly ballistically to the rounds that we had recovered from our scene.
That evidence right there is one of the biggest things you could have in any murder case. You can find the weapons and find a person who has the weapons. That's major.
So now that we can put Tony, at least the guns, at the scene, that gave us the ability to change gears with Tony. We had the information and ammunition that we needed to confront Tony about what really happened.
Detectives head back to the jail to interview their prime suspect.
As Tony began to kind of spin his version of what happened to Ron, now he acknowledged having a little knowledge of it, but he said that he had loaned his guns to someone else and that he didn't know what they did with them. He didn't have any involvement in it. But what he says is that he had heard Ron was dealing drugs, and that's why he was killed.
We had already done a thorough background on Ron. We knew Ron was not involved in any drug business. We had talked to too many people. He was a happily married man trying to make it in life. That's what Ron was.
Then Tony gave us information that would kind of put us on some individuals that might be involved, and we tracked those individuals down, and we were able to confirm 100% that they had nothing to do with Ron's death.
People sometimes, when they are being questioned, especially when the police have some of the goods on them, will make up stories, and that's what Perez did. As far as the police could determine, that was a total concoction by Tony Perez.
Detectives believe Tony is lying, but wonder what motive he could have to kill Ron.
We were still kind of struggling to establish how Tony would have came into Ron's life.
Going through Tony's belongings, we found some cell phone bills there, and they were linked the name of Kim Miller. Kim Miller turned out to be Tony's girlfriend. So we went to talk to Kim.
Kim Miller is the owner of a Panama City hair salon.
Tony and Kimberly, they had been in a romantic relationship for several months.
We were told by Kim that Tony, he was doing odd things for her. He would come around the hair salon and he would actually shampoo customers' hair, clean up, sweep up the shop, things like that.
Investigators look for a connection between Tony and Ron Stovall.
Kim was familiar with the Stovall homicide. She claims that she first heard about it because she had a customer that had called in and canceled her hair appointment saying how her ex-son-in-law had been murdered.
When detectives ask Kim for the customer's name, they receive a startling response.
The connection kind of came out of nowhere and almost as a surprise.
Kim's client is Ann Trexler, who happens to be Tina's mother. Tina, Ron's ex-wife.
Police believe husband and father Ron Stovall was shot and killed by criminal Tony Perez. They're now exploring a potential link between Tony and Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
When Kim Miller indicated that she styled Tina's mother, Ann Trexler's hair, and law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
Ann Trexler is the mother of Ron's ex-wife, Tina.
We knew of the ongoing hostilities between Ron and Tina. So when we talked with Kim Miller, we asked her if she had ever met Tina, his ex-wife, and she did met her on a couple of occasions. Tina's mother, Ann, however, was a regular client, was in there on a regular basis.
With Tina previously eliminated from the investigation, detectives asked Kim more about Tina's mother, 52-year-old Ann Trexler.
She told us that Ann's talking to her and telling her about these problems with her daughter going through this custody battle with her ex-husband. And she was upset about it. She's afraid she's going to lose her grandchild.
Ann had told Kimberly the Trexlers had to get a second mortgage on their home to provide legal assistance to Tina.
Could the custody battle be the motive behind Ron's murder?
At that point, we were trying to determine exactly who she was. She hadn't really been on our radar at all. We knew that she was Tina's mom. We knew that she was Tina's alibi at the time of this crime.
Ann Trexler, no criminal history, supposedly a wonderful grandmother and fine Christian lady who would never be involved in something like this.
Investigators contact Ron's wife, Angelica, and learn his custody dispute with Tina brought out a different side to his former mother-in-law.
Apparently they had a good relationship when Tina and them were married, but it was just a constant battle over visitation rights. Always just such a fight with her.
Looking to see if Ann could have anything to do with Ron's murder, detectives bring her in for an interview.
When we talked to her, she stated to us that there was no way that she had anything to do with killing him. She did not want him dead. Matter of fact, she said she loved him. And then Ann Trexler wanted a lawyer. And once they get a lawyer, you're done talking.
So we're kind of getting a heightened sense of concern as far as her involvement in the case because she decided to basically not cooperate with the investigation.
Having hit a wall with Ann, detectives get a breakthrough when forensics results arrive.
We got confirmation that Tony's boot was consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. Also, Tony had been in possession of the guns used. Now you've got a personal item putting him at the crime scene. At that point, we knew we had our shooter.
That's a big piece of evidence right there.
We were able to go back to Tony and present him with what we knew.
He admitted killing Ron. His very words were, "Okay, I did it." It's the shortest confession to a murder I've ever taken in my career.
Investigators push Tony to reveal how the crime unfolded, and what he tells them is shocking.
Tony told us that Ann Trexler wanted to have her ex-son-in-law killed and was willing to pay to have it done. When we found out Ann Trexler wanted to hire somebody to kill Ron, I mean, this is unbelievable. Ex-mother-in-law gonna get involved and have pay somebody to kill her ex-son-in-law?
He had met Ann at the hair salon. She was complaining about Ron and that the two of them had worked out a deal for Tony to kill Ron in exchange for about $10,000 to be paid to Tony.
On November 10, 1998, Tony is charged with the first-degree murder of Ron Stovall. But the case is far from over. Detectives turn their attention back to alleged mastermind Ann Trexler. Searching for answers, detectives pull Ann's phone records.
The phone records were a treasure trove of information. They showed a lot of phone traffic between Kim Miller and Antonio Perez and Ann Trexler.
It clearly looks like Kimberly was the middle person between Ann and Tony.
There were phone calls between the Trexler house and Kim Miller at strange hours of the night for strange amounts of time that could not be explained away by saying, we're setting up our rinse and set. Another thing, we were able to show that Ann Trexler received a phone call from Kim Miller the morning right after Ron's death. So there were links to tie Ann Trexler to this plot, but there was no hard, concrete connection of evidentiary value. We needed something else that would show that Ann, in fact, had hired Antonio Perez to kill Ron Stovall.
Tony Perez, he says that he had come to an agreement with Ann Trexler to kill Ron for $10,000.
Detectives scour Ann's financial records for any signs she had commissioned Ron's murder.
We have withdrawals from her bank accounts that coincide with when Tony says he was paid and the amount that he was paid. So now we have proof that what Tony's telling us is accurate regarding being paid. With regards to Ann, none of us had ever worked a case like this. So it was kind of a shock that all of these pieces were kind of lining up to support she is the motivation to this entire crime.
But we felt like we still could not make the case against Ann Trexler. We needed someone to corroborate what Tony Perez said. We needed somebody else that can draw the line between the money and the murder of Ron Stovall.
We have to go back to the middleman in the case, which is Kim Miller.
She's the whole key to this thing.
She was looking at criminal charges, but without her, we're not going to get Ann. She is the only way that we're going to have true accounts of what happened.
We went and picked up Kim Miller and brought her in.
Kim Miller, she stonewalled. She said, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm not telling you anything.
Investigators working the Ron Stovall homicide have charged shooter Tony Perez with murder and believe the mastermind is Ron's former mother-in-law, Ann Trexler. But to build an ironclad case, they need Tony's girlfriend and go-between, Kim Miller, to share what she knows. However, Kim is refusing to talk.
It really wasn't until we actually laid out in front of her the phone records and drew the lines between Ann and her and Tony that we were able to convince her to cooperate with the investigation.
We let her know, she was going to be charged with accessory to the murder, and she's facing life in prison.
Prosecutors offer Kim a deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against Ann Trexler. Eventually, Kim takes the deal.
Kim sang like a songbird.
Kimberly was very adamant that there was a deep-seated hatred for Ron on Ann Trexler's part.
She indicated that on many occasions, Ann Trexler ranted and raved about Ron Stovall, how bad he was, that he was going to remove her granddaughter. She wished that somebody would take him out, and it got more and more. Finally, Kim said, okay, if you're really serious, I know somebody who might help you.
Kim lets her know that her boyfriend, Tony Perez, will get rid of him for $10,000. And that's how the deal came about.
Kim then reveals how in the early hours of October 6th, Tony drove to the Stovall house to lie in wait for Ron.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, when Ron went out to his vehicle, Tony took a shot at him with a pistol. And Ron ran inside and slammed the door behind him, and Tony Perez fired more shots, which struck Ron in the back.
To finish Ron off, Tony tried to force his way inside the house.
Angelica, she tried to hold the door, and Tony Perez fired a shot that almost struck her. She ran to the other room to call 911.
Tony Perez came in, and he found Ron on the floor and walked up with a shotgun, said, "This is for her." Boom. He killed Ron Stovall right there.
When he made the statement, "This is for her," it's our belief that Tony was doing this on Ann's behalf.
Tony came there to do one thing, and that was to kill Ron Stovall.
Once he had made his getaway, he was able to reach out to Kimberly and make notice to her that, in fact, the job had been done. And then, of course, she notified Ann.
Kim swears Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler, wasn't involved in their murderous plan.
Law enforcement looked at Tina Trexler. Her mother, Ann, may have confided in her, but no one could get to that much evidence to put Tina in the situation of taking Ron's life.
Ann Trexler, she tried to be the grandmotherly type, but she planned this whole thing.
Ann Trexler's thought pattern was Ron Stovall is getting ready to take my only precious granddaughter away from me, and I won't have visitation, and he left my daughter, he married somebody else. He should not be able to get away with this.
From an investigator's perspective, Ann carried just as much weight as Tony. Without Ann, Tony would not have even known who Ron Stovall was.
On February 15th, 2000, Ann Trexler is formally charged with the murder of her former son-in-law, Ron Stovall.
And the cops called and he said, "Got her, she's in jail." She is morbidly evil. The darkest, blackest soul ever. And then she'll put on a face like she's just Miss Innocent. The killer, he didn't know Ron. Ann knew Ron. I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred in their body, in their mind, in their heart.
In court, shooter Tony Perez pleads guilty and is sentenced to life without parole. In February 2000, Kim Miller is sentenced to 5 years probation as part of her deal with prosecutors. Finally, in 2001, Ann's trial begins and she pleads not guilty.
Ann Trexler took the stand. She testified about not being involved. She testified about her concerns of her grandchild and the fact that she had absolutely no involvement.
On May 14th, 2001, the jury finds Ann Trexler guilty of first-degree murder. She's sentenced to life in prison without parole.
There's a little piece. I'm in a little piece in this horrible thing. A little justice, I guess.
Gets a little emotional sometimes. It's not just me. We're a whole team working this thing. We celebrated, I'll just say that. We celebrated this.
The most striking thing to me is that these are all ordinary people. And it's a little bit frightening to think that people who are walking around living everyday ordinary lives would be capable of this.
The one that initiated it all was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
For Ron's family, his loss continues to be deeply felt.
I miss him and I love him so much. My poor daughter, she never got the honor she deserved. She never got her daddy. We celebrate his life all the time. He loved life. He loved to be happy. And I tried so hard to keep his memory alive. Very much so. I will never forget how amazing Ron was.
10:15 on the evening of the 21st of November 2021, the police received a call from an address in Dragon Rise in Norton Fitzwarren, where the occupant of that address had told us that he stabbed two of his neighbours, Jennifer and Stephen Chappell. Put your hands up. When you look at the circumstances around this case, is it unusual? Of course it's unusual. Norton Fitzwarren's a respectable place. We don't expect this sort of offences to take place. We don't often get double murders. And for one person to stab two victims in quick succession is not an easy task.
Jennifer Chappell didn't even have time to get up off the sofa. When the police found her, she was slumped forward in front of the sofa where she'd kind of fallen as she was dying.
Why did it happen? There was no obvious motive for this offence. This is somebody in their own living room on a Sunday night, watching TV, sat like every other husband and wife around the country, brutally murdered within their own house.
Jennifer was my best friend in the whole world. I moved to Glastonbury and started at the local primary school, and she took me right under her wing. Jennifer commanded a room. She would walk in and instantly everyone would be like, wow. She oozed charisma. Jen embodied everything that Glastonbury stands for, crystals and witches and birds and kind of like this witchy Glastonbury essence. She used to take me onto the local music scene, which was all predominantly metal, and it was a bit of a trademark for us as friends to go for guys in bands. It was a bit of a kind of, I'm with a guy in a band. It's like, of course you are.
It's on the colourful local music scene that Jennifer meets the man who will change her life.
I knew a guy had come onto the scene that had caught her attention, and that guy was Stephen. Stephen was a teacher, but he was playing music as well in a successful band that were really well known in the area. To hear of Jennifer and Stephen, it wasn't a surprise because of who Jennifer was and who Stephen was.
From the moment 29-year-old Stephen and 26-year-old Jennifer get together, they are inseparable.
I think as soon as everybody met him, they knew he's the one. There was so much love between them. They were just the perfect match.
They were soulmates. He was very, very, very dry, very sarcastic, confident, outgoing. He loved music, absolutely loved music.
Jennifer had sent me a message saying, meet your new niece or nephew, and I will never forget the joy I felt seeing the ultrasound photo and just going, oh my God, I'm going to have a nephew or a niece. They were sort of the moon, because I think Jennifer always wanted children.
With one child and another on the way, the couple begin to squirrel away money to buy a home of their own.
Norton Fitzwarren's quite a small place, quite quiet. Only about 3,000 people live there, so more of a suburb of Taunton, really. We've got some new build estates around the edges.
Jennifer and Stephen's house hunting takes them to what appears to be the perfect location.
Dragon Rise is just off the main road through Norton Fitzwarren. Everyone had a back garden. There were schools nearby.
I think they were just happy that they had a place, and I think that's where they thought they'd settle down and stay forever.
Jennifer says it was a really lovely environment to bring children up in. Really great sense of community, amazing neighbours. Jennifer just moved in and slotted right in with everyone.
The Reeves just seemed like a normal family, like anybody else on that same estate.
Soon after moving in, the Chappells meet their next-door neighbours, Kaylee Reeves and her truck driver husband, Colin.
Colin Reeves was working for a transport company delivering extendable platforms around the country. He has 2 young daughters that were at the same local primary school, and Kaylee, his wife, was a mum.
The Reeveses had 2 daughters and the Chappells had 2 sons. They had that in common. They both had kids and they used to bump into each other on the school run.
I think quite early on they got on quite well, like they were friendly.
Colin Reeves was a bit quieter, maybe not as chatty as Kaylee. I don't think they were uneasy about him. I think they just thought he was not a very extroverted person. One evening, Stephen was manoeuvring into his parking space and he bumped Colin Reeves's car and he caused quite a bit of damage.
Stephen was really embarrassed. He was genuinely a bit sort of, oh God, what have I done? And was very aware that everyone's children would be asleep. So he left it to Jennifer. Jennifer sent a message, you know, that we're really sorry, how do we rectify this?
It cost a couple of £1,000 to get it fixed.
While Stephen and Jennifer consider the matter closed, next door the Reeves aren't quite so happy with the way it was handled.
It does seem, from our records from that point, the relationship between the 2 families deteriorated somewhat.
If an issue, even if it seems quite minor at the time, isn't resolved, then there's a problem, because the feelings of resentment can fester over time. Nobody could have predicted that this innocent act of accidentally bashing into your neighbour's car could have set off a chain of events that eventually led to such a...
Colin came out.
You can't reverse in here when the car's here all the time. I thought about that. You've got one parking space. Well,
Jennifer wasn't aggressive in her reply. It was just, yes, you can, like, I can, this is a free space. And it was niggly rather than aggressive. He'd obviously been stewing on it a little. He was automatically aggressive, which automatically made Jennifer a bit sort of on the back foot.
It felt like he was coming out just to try and maybe scare her, maybe try and show that he's got some sort of power, but I'm sure Colin probably didn't like her because she would happily actually argue back.
Colin Reeves couldn't understand why Jennifer Chappell would get another car when she didn't have the space for it, and Jennifer couldn't understand why he couldn't just get over it. I think they just butted heads, really. Colin Reeves came up with the idea of widening the parking space.
He'd laid some bricks in the communal area to widen his driveway, and at the top of that communal area was where cars would park. So it kind of made it so no one could park there, which made Jennifer and Stephen's life difficult when they now had 2 cars.
They asked him, you know, why he had done it, and he said that by widening his space, this had reduced the stress that he and Kaylee were going through as a result of the parking space issue.
The way that Reeves has dealt with this whole situation suggests that he's not a man that has the psychological skills to handle it in a more healthy and calmer manner, but instead somebody who's probably quite impulsive. He's the kind of person that will not express his emotions in a healthy manner, but rather bottle them up.
At this point, Jennifer was holding quite a lot of anger towards the Reeves, more from feeling like they were being a little petty.
And after 3 years, Jennifer and Kaylee's relationship has now also completely deteriorated.
It got to the point where Jennifer and Kaylee didn't want to run into each other on the school run anymore. Friendly neighbourliness had completely broken down.
There was tension between the mothers. Kaylee believed that Jennifer was shooting her looks or talking about her. Jennifer believed the same about Kaylee.
Kayleigh would then tell Colin, or Colin would find out about these, and I think that really played on his mind because he really wanted to protect his family and his wife specifically.
Jennifer's on edge, so Stephen's on edge. Kayleigh's on edge, so Colin's on edge. Everyone's feeling it. And Colin turns up at her place of work.
Jennifer is working in the cafe at the garden centre when she gets the feeling she's being watched.
Jennifer texted me and she said, Colin's come to my work and he's just sat here staring at me. He's got his arms crossed. He's watching me. He's not interacting with his children. He's just sat there. I believe he was there for well over 2 hours. A long time. To sit in a cafe and just watch someone. Why? It's very, very intimidating and then validating Jennifer's fear of the Reeves.
Jennifer said that he turned his chair to face her. It did seem a bit strange to go to the same place that your neighbour's working and turn your chair to stare at them.
It's possible that it was just a coincidence and Colin was just there with his children, but it really feels like this is done intentionally to be menacing and to be intimidating. And this must have been terrifying for Jennifer.
Colin Reeves joined the army when he was 17 and he passed the commando course, which is extremely difficult and quite gruelling, and he was very proud to have passed that. He went to Afghanistan to Camp Bastion, and while he was there he was also a security guard on the prisoner of war camp where they held the suspected terrorists. So he had quite a varied and probably quite a harrowing time in Afghanistan.
And I believe it's at that point that, for me, the penny dropped that Jennifer was scared of something worse than a dispute, because Jennifer's words to me were, he's a trained killer and he's watching me.
It wasn't just a neighbourly dispute anymore, this had become personal.
The couple find that what had once been a happy home has become a prison.
Jennifer got more and more scared because of Colin's background in the army, and she just felt more scared to go out. And that's not really fair, because you should feel safe in the place you're living.
And next door, the Reeves are in a state of turmoil too.
I think by November 2021, Colin Reeves's mental state had deteriorated quite a bit. It was coming up to Remembrance Sunday, which was always very difficult for him as an army veteran. It was around then that he had a conversation with Kayleigh, and he said that he just wasn't feeling himself. He thought that she would be better off without him, and he talked about his job and how depressed and lonely he felt driving the lorry all day. He was in quite a bad place mentally.
It does feel like he's unravelling. We know that he's got these mental health problems, and of course there's this ongoing dispute with the neighbours, and then on top of that he's got some marital problems. So to me it feels like the whole world around him is crumbling.
Jennifer Chappell came home to our house one night. She knew that the Reeveses had this camera that overlooked their parking space, and so she made a rude gesture at the camera.
Reeves has taken to watching the monitor of his CCTV camera, and Jennifer's action leaves him enraged.
Ultimately, only Colin Reeves knows why he set up a camera. I know he didn't like cameras, he didn't like feeling like he was on camera. He used to tape over the camera on his phone because maybe he thought people were spying on him. In his job as a lorry driver, there was a camera in his cab that videoed everything he was doing. That was something he really didn't like about his job.
The 11th of November is really important because it's Remembrance Day. And Colin obviously is an ex-soldier. I believe he dealt with his own demons that day.
Colin spends the morning at a remembrance event. Back at home, trouble is brewing.
Jennifer had seen the Reeves children hitting and spitting and trying to hurt her cats. She'd said over a text message, she's letting her kids just terrorise my cats. How is she letting that happen?
Jennifer confronted Kaylee about it and said, your children are kind of spitting at the cats, hissing at them. And I think Kaylee said something along the lines like, that's what children do. They were quite confrontational with each other.
Colin returns to find his wife Kaylee upset and angry. As Jennifer returns home, he suddenly approaches.
When she got out of her car and walked towards her front door, Colin Reeves appeared out of the darkness and accused Jennifer of gobbing off. And she said Kaylee started it and told him to F off. Once Colin came out of the darkness, both of them were firing on all cylinders. Colin Reeves was swearing at her, calling her all sorts of names, calling her fat.
She's the one who started it, so
He's really aggressive. I think Jennifer just wanted to get inside and out of the way of it. She didn't want anything to happen.
She was really scared when she goes back in that house. She calls me. I'm sat on the sofa with another friend who's gone, this is horrible. I think that was the real moment that Jennifer feared for her life.
It was clear that any kind of diplomatic relations between the two families were gone by that stage. It was full-on war between them.
Jennifer and I were exchanging videos on a social media platform, and she voiced her concerns about Colin. Danny, he is a trained killer. He's coming for me. I think that all made us stand up and take notice.
Colin Reeves went to the Christmas lights switch on in Taunton with his mum and his sister and his two daughters. He was surrounded by crowds and he found being in a crowded environment quite difficult after lockdown.
Colin Reeves arrives home shortly before 6 p.m. Next door, Stephen Chappell is marking homework. Jennifer is putting the boys to bed before settling down to watch TV.
Sunday, 21st November 2021 in Dragon Rise. Cold evening, coming on towards Christmas.
3 hours later, the Chappell CCTV camera detects movement.
The CCTV is essentially motion activated. The first thing you see is a figure coming over the garden fence to the right, which is the direction of Colin Reeves' house. That person then crouches down underneath the windows at the back of the house. Then in the bottom corner, what appears to be a back door opening, and that opens quite quickly after he crouches down. And then very soon after that, you hear a really piercing scream.
The screams are too distressing to broadcast. They last well over 10 seconds.
When you listen to that, there's no doubt that that is somebody that is totally fearing for their life. Quite soon after the screams, that figure is seen leaving the back of the house and returning in the direction he came from.
The neighbours are alerted by the screams coming from Jennifer and Stephen's house.
They heard this screaming coming from next door. It was like nothing they'd ever heard before. It was terrible.
It's November, the windows are shut, the doors are shut in houses, and they hear these screams over the TV. And that led one of the neighbours to text within their WhatsApp group, one of the other neighbours saying, did you hear that scream?
Texted Jennifer and he said, are you okay? No response.
And that led them both, because the scream was so significant, to say, let's go and check everything's okay.
The door was unlocked and they went inside. And they went down the hall into the living room, and that was where they saw Jennifer and Stephen lying in a pool of blood on the living room floor.
I was stabbed.
Right, when
Neighbour's husband and the mother.
Whereabouts have you been stabbed?
No, not me, the neighbours.
The neighbour's been stabbed by who?
By me.
By you?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Colin Reeves sounded very not calm exactly, but very collected, considering what he'd just done.
How bad are the injuries?
They've both been stabbed
Right,
times.
several times. All right, stay on the line for me, okay? Are you in your house on your own?
No, my wife, my children in bed.
All right, okay.
It feels like Reeves is doing his best to be cooperative. He's answering all the questions.
Tell me exactly what's happened. Take a deep breath.
You can even hear him, it sounds like he's sobbing, it sounds like he's crying.
I went round
Yeah.
with a knife.
Okay.
The more you listen to, you hear him starting to breathe more heavily. There's longer gaps between what he's saying.
I've stabbed both of them.
All right, how many times?
I don't know, a couple of times each. 2 or 3 times each, maybe.
I think as he's speaking to the call handler, it slowly, the gravity of what he's done is starting to dawn on him.
Are they still conscious and breathing?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
I think at that point he was shocked at himself.
Are they males or females?
One male, one female.
But then you can nearly hear like the army veteran in him as well. Every time she asks him a question, he answers it succinctly, he answers it clearly.
What's your name?
Colin Reeves.
All right, Colin. How are you spelling your surname?
R-E-E-V-E-S.
All right.
But then you hear the man behind it who's struggling to come to terms with what's just happened. He's starting to realise what he's just done.
What kind of knife did you use?
It was a dagger.
Okay.
The kind of things that hit me from that call is he appears quite lucid, seems to understand what he's done.
All right, just stay on the line for me, okay? We're going to get some help out there as soon as we can. All right. So you stabbed them both several times?
Yes.
Quite coherent. It explains quite plainly what's occurred, answers the questions that the call handler puts to him.
Where's the knife now?
It's in my house.
Okay. All right. You've done the right thing by calling us, okay? So what was their situation when you left?
They were both, he was lying on the floor, she was lying on the sofa.
Right, okay. And were they awake? Were they...
No, I think they were sort of drifting.
I'm sure there's absolute turmoil going on in his head. He's probably thinking about the impact it's going to have on his wife and his own children. So a lot of very conflicting and very difficult thoughts all flooding in at once.
Even before the call has ended, police units from the whole area are scrambled.
When the police arrive at a crime scene, our first job is to preserve life and also assess what we were actually dealing with. They were met with absolutely horrendous circumstances. 2 deceased people in the living room, 2 adults. Both had suffered a number of stab wounds to their torsos, and there was significant blood on the floor. And really, unfortunately, there's 2 young children asleep upstairs in their bedroom. Those children were removed from the premises quite quickly and taken to a safe place until we could establish who their next of kin was, essentially, so they could be with somebody that they knew and knew them.
Rumours of an incident on Dragon Rise spread quickly.
I have local alerts on my computer that ping up, and it said an incident was unfolding in Norton Fitzwarren. So I clicked on it. Then they dinged up a picture and it was Jennifer's door. All it said was a scene was unfolding. So I took to social media. The forefront of my mind was, is Jennifer okay? Has Jennifer been hurt?
Danny gets a message from a friend of Jennifer.
She said, I'm really sorry. She said, Jennifer's passed away. Without a shadow of a doubt, the second I heard Jennifer was dead, I knew it was Colin. There was no doubt in my mind that Colin had done it. She told us this was going to happen, and it did.
When the police officers went to arrest Colin Reeves from his house, it was pretty calm.
Put your hands up.
Not me, mate, him.
You?
Go in the house, then.
Right, his demeanour was one of somebody that was resigned to the fact that he was going to be arrested.
Hold still. Listen, you're under arrest at the minute.
and the attempted murder of 2 people inside the address next door. Do you understand? Okay. Let's walk over here a minute, out the way.
To me, it seems that Reeves is just completely dazed. You know, he's just stunned, he's stupefied. So I think the enormity of the situation and the consequences of what he's done is flooding into his mind. But at the same time, he was pretty much cooperative with the police. He was following instructions. It didn't look like he was suffering from acute symptoms of mental illness at that time.
Let's walk over here. Although he's committed what at that stage we believe is a really serious offence, we still need to worry about the safeguarding of Colin Reeves. Yeah. Having committed this offence, what sort of effect is that going to have on him and his mental health at that stage?
Reeves is taken directly to a police custody suite.
How are you feeling yourself, bro? How are you feeling in yourself now? Confused. Okay.
By having him in the custody suite, we're able to monitor him live time to make sure that he's not going to do himself any harm and he can't cause danger to anybody else.
Under questioning, it's as though the former soldier believes he's back in Afghanistan.
Probably a lot to take in.
Message from my stepsister, and it said something like, you know, are you awake? Can you talk? And it's like urgent. And I thought, that's a bit strange. She called me and said, Jennifer and Stephen have been murdered. I thought, this is a prank. What's going on? What's happened? I've just woken up. My brain's not quite with it enough. And she said, yep, they've been murdered. I was like, the boys, where are the boys? Are they okay? Are they alive? She said, yep, they're fine. I just screamed into my pillow because my son was still asleep. I thought, I can't wake him.
On Monday morning, police forensic teams enter the Chapels home.
I've got Colin Reeves in custody initially for 24 hours, which I can then get extended up to 96 hours. But I need to recover that evidence quickly. I need to be in a position to be able to charge Colin Reeves within that time period.
Neil Mead hurries to piece together how and why the killings occurred.
It's quite a small house, just kitchen and a living room downstairs, with a door onto the back garden, and both Stephen and Jennifer were in that room, and there was very little sign of disturbance elsewhere within the premises. This is something that happened very, very quickly. It wasn't a situation where Stephen or Jennifer were able to react.
For the first 3 days after Jennifer and Stephen were murdered, the children didn't know. We took their oldest to the park, and he said, have Mummy and Daddy done a bad thing? Are they with the police? And all we thought was, we wish that's what it was. We talked to Stephen's sister, and she said, we'll do it together. We'll tell them together. They both came and sat on my lap, cuddling up to me. I told them, do you remember how Mummy talked about Grandad, who is no longer with us? You know, he's up in heaven. And I said, well, Mummy and Daddy have joined him. They're okay. They're watching over you. At that point, their oldest made the worst noise, like the proper horrible cry. And I will never forget. It was one of the hardest days of my life. It really was.
Throughout the interview process, Colin Reeves answered no comment to every question.
Despite having admitted the killings in his 999 call, he is now less willing to talk.
Tell me what happened yesterday in Dragon Rise that led to the deaths of Jennifer and Stephen Chaplin. Amen.
He sat forward in his chair. It's a typical position that somebody would sit in being interviewed for such a serious offence when the gravity of what's happened is starting to come to the forefront of their mind, and that the impact that's going to have on him for the rest of his life alongside the victims.
When you were being assessed in the custody unit here, you said, I shouldn't have done it, I've ruined their lives and mine. Can I just confirm, did you say that?
No problem.
And what did you mean by that?
No problem.
The next stage would be to get the forensic post-mortems of Stephen and Jennifer completed, which will give me a cause of death. In Stephen and Jennifer's case, they were both found to have died from 6 stab wounds. So that tells me that he's gone there intending to kill him, and has done it very quickly once he's inside the premises.
When we actually look at the attacks, they were ferocious and they were efficient, but somehow they don't feel frenzied. So I think what we can garner from that is that there was actually a calmness and a cold calculation in terms of Colin Reeves's state of mind at the time.
All right. What kind of knife did you use?
It was a dagger.
Okay.
And the stab wounds had the telltale diamond pattern of a very particular type of blade.
The dagger we believe was used in the murder is what's called a Fairburn Sykes dagger, and it's the traditional dagger of the Commando Regiment.
Detectives believe they can see it in Reeves' hand as he enters the chapel's home.
When Colin Reeves left the army, he was given a presentation frame which had a dagger as the centerpiece.
It was something that army veterans got. It was a kind of a prestige thing. And we know now that he took the dagger out of the frame.
Reeves makes an active choice to use the ceremonial dagger. It probably would have been quicker and easier for him to just walk into his kitchen and grab a knife rather than smash the frame where it was. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's somehow symbolic to Reeves.
Another bit of evidence we gained was a call-in device, an Alexa-type device within the Reeves house.
And specialist investigators are able to find something in the memory of that device that finally suggests a motive for these brutal killings.
We were able to recover from that a small clip which supported the theory we had that there'd been an argument, a disagreement between Colin Reeves and his wife immediately prior to the offence.
He came home from the Christmas lights switch on and he went upstairs where his wife Kaylee was watching TV, and he said, "I've been feeling lonely," and she says, "Well, so have I."
Reeves tries to talk to his wife about his struggles with his mental health.
She said, "There's only so many years I can take this," and it was at that point that she suggested that they should separate for 2 weeks as a sort of trial. Colin left the bedroom and then sat down on the stairs. He said that he cried and he felt a fear of losing everything, of losing his family, his kids, his wife. At that point he would have been quite close to the military plaque on the wall, which had the dagger in it.
Colin probably hit rock bottom because it means that he has to reassess his life, his future, maybe even his own personality traits. The potential breakup with his wife, I think, is a huge trigger point.
Investigators formally charge Colin Reeves with the murders of Jennifer and Stephen Chappell. But Reeves decides to contest the case.
I was very, very angry to hear that he'd pleaded not guilty. I was like, he has to be guilty, you know, he's admitted.
It was my first trial in my first job as a journalist, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. I think the fact that Reeves was an ex-soldier and that this had been a neighbourly dispute that had got out of hand had really drawn in a lot of journalists. The public gallery was absolutely packed.
As the trial of Colin Reeves begins, the veteran of the war in Afghanistan stuns the courtroom by pleading not guilty to the murders of Stephen and Jennifer Chappell on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
Diminished responsibility is a psychiatric defence. It's only relevant for murder and it downgrades it to manslaughter. The defendant and his defence team, on the strength of psychiatric expert evidence, has to prove that at the time of the killing they were suffering from an abnormal state of mind that affected either his ability to understand his conduct or to form a rational judgment or to exhibit self-control.
It just didn't add up. We were like, why is he doing diminished responsibility? Surely he knew what he was doing because he's the one that's called the police. He knows he's killed 2 people. So it just didn't make sense at all.
We understand that he has mental health struggles and we're not without, you know, I don't want to use the word sympathy, but understanding that people struggle with their mental health, but that does not mean that you get away with what you did to our friends.
Reeves' defence claims the combination of the Christmas lights he visited and the proximity of the war memorial triggered an episode of post-traumatic stress disorder.
When somebody's experiencing a genuine severe post-traumatic stress disorder flashback, they're transported back in time to the traumatic event like war. So everything around them, whether it's the visual sights, whether it's sounds, whether it's the feeling of panic, feels absolutely real.
In court, we heard from his wife about when he was in Afghanistan.
She describes how he changed upon his return from the war zone.
He came home in 2009 and there'd been some sort of a skirmish or a scuffle with somebody else while he was in the army, and that meant that he was sent home without having a chance to decompress, which most military people do. You know, after they've been to somewhere like Afghanistan, they go on a kind of a holiday and they decompress and try and put it all behind them. But Colin Reeves didn't get the chance to do that because he was sent straight home. I think it was a very sad trial, and there were bits of it that were very difficult to cover. Certainly the audio of the moment the Chappells were murdered was incredibly difficult to hear.
The sound of Jennifer's dying screams shocks everyone present.
Family members left the court for those moments, but we heard it, and I don't think I'll ever forget what I heard in that courtroom when Mr. and Mrs. Chappell's last moments were played out.
I think I allowed myself to listen to it for closure. It didn't sound like Jennifer, but obviously you knew it was. And it was horrifying.
Reeves may have refused to comment under interrogation, but the 999 call he made is a key piece of evidence, played to the jury by the prosecution.
Tell me exactly what's happened.
I went round.
Yeah.
With a knife.
Okay.
I've stabbed both of them.
All right. What kind of knife did you use?
It was a dagger.
So you stabbed them both several times?
Yes.
The jury's reaction to listen to that call was a disbelief, and it really focuses them about what we're dealing with here. You know, you've got two people that are dead, and a man phoning the police to say, this is what I've done.
I felt very angry listening to his voice from the call, thinking like he's just taken two wonderful people off this planet. He's orphaned two children. I was confused. If you've just gone and done that, why would you call the police?
The court is once again packed as Colin Reeves takes the stand. He reads from a pre-prepared statement.
He described feeling ashamed and disgusted by what he had done. He said he couldn't believe that he had taken the Chappells away from their children and left their children with no parents. And he just seemed completely remorseful for what he had done and really confused by his behaviour.
I was crying at it, not because it was sad, because I was so angry. I was like, how can he stand up on the stand and read that out? I don't think there's anything he could say to have made me feel better at all.
After hearing nearly 2 weeks of evidence, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
We were sat there and it felt like time was just going so slowly.
The jury takes just over 5 hours to reach their conclusion.
Reeves' proposal and that of his defence team that he had post-traumatic stress disorder was rejected. If he was suffering from a flashback at the time of the Christmas light celebration, he would have acted out aggressively, potentially, at that moment in time. It doesn't make sense to me that he would have had that experience, then managed to drive all the way home and still be agitated and still be in the midst of a flashback. And that also wouldn't explain why he attacked his neighbours.
We all sat with Jennifer at the grave and listened to the sentencing on the phone. We felt it was something that we wanted to be with Jen. We couldn't take her with us, so we went and sat with her.
The judge sentences Reeves to 38 years in prison, telling him, "You stabbed your victims in their own home and left their children as orphans."
And it was a huge sigh of relief.
And all of us just in unison, tears streaming down our faces because we couldn't react.
I was satisfied that justice had been obtained for Jennifer and Stephen and their children and their family.
I'm fascinated by Colin Reeves' actual mental state at the time of the killings. He strikes me as somebody who's actually a very paranoid individual, possibly related to the trauma that he's seen. There were marital difficulties, and he potentially was on the verge of splitting up with his wife. So I think maybe he harbored some anger and resentment, potentially towards her, but because he loves her, he instead is displacing it onto the neighbours.
Not long after the trial ends, Rhonda, Jennifer's sister, has a baby daughter.
She's named after my sister because I wanted a name to carry on. I didn't want it to get stuck. She deserved to carry on, even if it means I'm going to be raising a little version of my big sister.
My first ever school was over in the distance there. That's where I met Jennifer. But this whole town tells the story of Jennifer, and one of her favourite views is of the Tor. This is my favourite photograph that I have of Jennifer. It's Jennifer and Stephen on their wedding day. They are really, really good memories. Really good memories. It's not a sadness when I look at them. It's sad that I can't make more.